Hello and welcome back to the Game Dev Show. I'm here with Yorai and Andrew today, and we're going to be answering some of your best or most interesting game development questions. If you've got a question you haven't submitted, make sure that you click a link in the description and just go submit it, or say hello in the chat and drop your question in there. We'll be watching there as well. So good morning, Andrew and Yorai, and good morning, everybody who's with us live in chat and watching later. Thanks for coming out. Oh, by the way, make sure you hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and share the stream and all that. I got to remember to say that at the beginning before I forget. So how you guys doing today?
Fantastic.
Yeah, doing good.
Doing great. I love how I've got all my energy now. I go from like super dead to full on energy the second the camera starts rolling live. I got to like totally shift and get full speed. So did you guys have any big announcements or anything you wanted to share today before we dive into questions? I've got 2 or 3 little things, but I want to give you an opportunity to jump in first if there's anything going on.
Well, I got to try one of Andrew's packs recently, so I figured I could talk about it today because it's really nice. And I recommend people get it because I was positively very impressed compared to trying to import certain other assets that had problems that weren't present there. So it was like a really nice scroll through.
Which asset was that?
So this was the Minotaur pack that I got from the Ukraine Mega Bundle that's still going up, which we should probably talk about as well.
That bundle's still live, right, Andrew?
It's live through the end of the month.
Okay. I think it was $40 was the minimum, and you got a ridiculous amount of stuff.
A ridiculous amount of stuff.
Yeah.
Do you know what the numbers were at? I think you were saying didn't they list that there was something huge on there that they'd sold already?
Yeah, I checked it the other day. Let me see. I'm going there now. $400 and something thousand, $430,000 as of this morning.
Oh, okay. And we will have a link for that in the description too. Anybody that wants to check that bundle out, I grabbed it. I think probably a lot of people already did. It's hard to pass up those bundles. The bundles just get nuts, especially when they go to charity. But even just the bundles alone, to be honest, like I struggle resisting those. So okay. Yeah. Outside of that, did you have anything else going on, Andrew, that you wanted to share?
A non-video game dev related thing. I was able to work on. I got a new printer. This is the impetus. I got a new printer, which means I could print cards for my physical board game that I've been working on, or that I had been working on before. I don't know if you guys remember a couple years ago, give or take 2 years, a pandemic started, and suddenly you couldn't go and do things in person. And that derailed my physical game dev work because suddenly I couldn't test my game in person. And this coming Saturday, I'm going to go back to a game dev in-person playtesting group in Redwood City, California. And at some point in the future, I plan on bringing my physical board game for anyone who wants to test it. So for any folks who are watching who are into board games and in the San Francisco Bay Area, I'll be sure to announce when I will definitely be at the Game Castle in Redwood City at some meetup group with my board game if anyone wants to try it out. It's fun.
Oh, that's really cool. I used to before the stuff you were talking about, go to board game conventions on occasion, especially like the little local ones. We'd go play. It'd be a lot of playing and then trying out some new things. There'd be a whole section of area where just people have new board games that they've come up with that they're testing out. And there'd be like 15, 20 of them. You could just go down the line and try out their new games, and they all want to show off their stuff and get some feedback and see how it plays. So that's a lot of fun. So I did not know you were doing that. That's going to be exciting.
Yeah. So I've been trying to go back to the meetup group for the past couple months, but I've just not been able to get there. But this Saturday, it's on my calendar to go, and I'm gonna bring my game, but I'm not planning on like coming and being like, hey, here's my game now. I brought it there before, but it's been 2 years, so I figure I will go and participate as a player before lunging in with my game too. But I do want to eventually get my game tested there and get some feedback from different people who aren't my friends.
That makes sense. It's funny, that aligns a lot with the mentality that Jason Story always tells everybody on Discord and getting help with game development. He's actually going to go there and participate before going in there and shoving your thing in front of everybody and asking for help. Right?
Yep.
and
Yeah.
play mine. Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
it works better that way. So that's cool. Well, awesome, man. I'll be excited to see that when it comes out. For me, I had two things I wanted to share. One, the mastermind group invitations have started going out, just a couple of them so far, doing a couple test runs to make sure that I get everything right. And then I'm going to keep scaling it up. So if you got one of those, make sure that you reply yes or no. If you haven't got one yet, just make sure you keep an eye out for emails. It might look a little spammy and automated. So just watch for it and make sure that you don't miss it. Don't miss the opportunity, because if people don't reply, I'm just replacing them until I get my groups full, or at least the initial ones. Outside of that, the other thing I wanted to share was the GameDev conference that I'm working on. So going to GDC, not that, but the online conference I'm doing in May. We're pretty much wrapped up on speakers and about to send out info. But if you really want to speak, just go to game.courses/speak or speakers, and you can submit a talk. There's a tiny little bit of time, and maybe like the last week, for anybody who wants to possibly have an opportunity to talk there. And if you want to sign up and get more info about it, you can just go to the site, gamedevguild.com. Go check it out. Anyway, I wanted to just this week take questions, guys. I didn't really have a whole lot planned, and I figured people always have a lot of questions. So we've got quite a few that were already submitted. If anybody wants to submit a question, again, you can drop it in the chat. You can super chat it if you want, or just drop it in the forum down below, and we'll all see it there, and I'll start popping them up on the screen. So I guess, unless you guys have anything else, should we just start jumping over and answering a couple questions?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah.
All right, let's start with I'll start with the first one that I've already copied in here, which was about managing art resources. And they're wondering, how do I manage art resources in my game? I have hundreds of icons. I had a singleton holding references to each of them, but this feels wrong. And I don't know about you guys, but this is definitely something that a pattern that I've seen more than once. So you guys have thoughts on how to manage art? Let's, I guess, starting with icons, since that was the specific. Like, if you've got hundreds or 1,000 icons in your game, how do you set that up and manage those references?
So to put a number on it, it doesn't really matter if it is an icon or not, but generally speaking, you want only the assets that actually need the icon to have access to that icon, and then they can provide it whenever you need to display it. So I get the desire to be able to say show icon ID and just be done with it, because you do need a way to figure out which icon you want to present after all. But it's better to have an asset hold that icon, and then when you're showing that asset, just ask it for the asset.icon. In regards to singletons versus anything else, recently Unity has the addressables, which let to dynamically load and unload content in a very nice way, such that only the assets that you actually need are loaded. It's useful for making sure you're not just loading everything up unnecessarily and having it always present in memory. There is the trade-off where you have to handle the loading and unloading of it.
Yeah, it gets a lot more complicated once you jump into addressables.
I wouldn't say it gets a lot more. It's just if
more.
You need the asset. Yeah. It is like 2 extra steps, but
yeah, it depends on your experience level. If you're good at code and stuff, it's not too difficult. If you're already struggling with the basics, then it gets really difficult, I think. If you struggle with a lot of the core stuff, then addressables is kind of the next level of complexity. But it is super powerful for exactly this kind of thing. But would you, so for, say they've just, let's just nail it back down to a set of icons for a second. Just put it in that context. In that case, you probably wouldn't, if it was just icons, I probably wouldn't go to something like addressables unless it was some absurd number. If you just had hundreds of icons and that's kind of the core of your art, I probably wouldn't go there, just because you can load all that in memory and not have it ever be an issue. There's not really a benefit there. But once you get into the bigger stuff, like where I was talking, it's very similar. You get to models and everything else, then going to something bigger like that would make sense. But would you split out? So say, just, I'm kind of curious, if you were building a game that was mostly UI based, mostly just a bunch of icons, and you were setting up the assets for those icons. You'd mentioned that you would create like an asset, like an icon file or something like that for each icon.
No, so
Or
icons
can
are
you
used to
clarify that a
present.
little?
Yeah, so icons are used to present something else in the game usually. Like if you have a sword, the sword needs an icon, but the
Right.
icon is
Or it
only
could just
there
be that
to.
that's the only representation of the item, right? Like it's a 2D. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just the icon.
So
You don't actually see a thing. Like it's your money or
So,
whatever.
so I'll have an asset for the sword, and then that asset would have a reference to an icon. And
Right.
then when the sword is loaded, the icon is loaded.
What
And
if
I
you
know that
don't have an item like that? What if it's more like a data structure, like these are just different types of currencies and you've got, 100
yeah,
different currencies and they all have an icon or something?
it still it doesn't change the fact that I can have a definition for what it is, and I can include other things with it. For example, the name, the display for it, if it has certain parameters. For example, gold is tinted in gold color, and crystals are in usually the bluish color, and all that. So I try to make sure that whatever assets I have a humane understanding of what they are. I don't need a direct correlation between that asset will always have, sorry, that resource in the game will always have that icon. I don't want to be able to even think about how to directly reference it. I want to have a clean resource, and whatever it needs is in that resource. So that's
Okay.
how I tend to approach these things.
Huh.
And the benefit of that is that you can then reference them cleanly. And even if you don't want the entire addressable thing, something that we do actually in the Butler project is that we use resources that load of a certain type, and it will load all the files in the resources folder of the type if it's a scriptable object, and that can contain the access to the icons, and then you can directly reference that, and you can include the IDs and everything there, and you don't need to handle anything in singleton directly. You don't have to manually manage putting them in there, to be precise,
Right.
which is a big convenience thing.
Nice. What about you, Andrew? What do you do to manage art in your games right now? Do you have a process or something you'd like to share?
Oh, you're
Ooh.
muted.
When it comes to icons, no. Like for me, when I think icons, I'm thinking menu UI. Sometimes icons go in with items or something like that. But first, I think menu UI, and then I'm just like, well, I'm just using the UI system. I just drag it over. But then I think, okay, but if I wanted to replace this later, what are my options, right? I'd have to go to each place. Hopefully, there's a prefab involved, so I only have to replace it once. But otherwise, I've got to go each place and replace it exactly in that spot. So that would be tedious, but that's what I would probably do at this point. I can't think of another way of doing it that just makes more sense at this point, only because I haven't done addressables, and so I don't
How
know.
do you do it for your items right now? Are those just like referencing directly to an icon?
So that uses my game modules bundle, and then the items module there, and that uses each item would have a scriptable object attached to it that you do reference through a repository, basically a singleton that has references to those. And if there are icons listed in that scriptable object, there could be, you don't have to, but there could be, then that would be there. And you would essentially have to, like when you want to display it, the first time you would, it would load the data, because you can't serialize that reference to the file. So it would load it from the scriptable object the first time you load the information. And then from then it kind of just pulls it. And so for that, it's more of a scriptable object system. And so you just store each icon in that related to the item that you're, that you're using, whether it's a physical item or if you're using it for, I mean, you could use that system for other things that aren't really items per se as well.
Right, that makes sense. I think that's how a lot of people set it up. It's kind of easiest way to do it, right? You just drop it into a scriptable object and reference it. But I like your solution for long-term and bigger stability on projects. So let's take, let's see, there are a lot of questions popping in.
There is also one more thing I should probably mention, which is Terraria itself does use a singleton approach for its assets, or rather it used to, and then we replaced the internals of it. So just to touch on that lightly, XNA has a content manager, which the purpose of it is you give it a type that you want to load and the path, and it will find the asset, load it, and give it back to you. And generally speaking, you will have one per something, but Terraria has just one content manager for everything. And we used to just ask for it everything directly and put it in texture 2D arrays. We, a few years ago, moved to a system where we have an asset in the code that has the path of where to load something, and then it asks for an asset loader to give it back something, and then we can use the content manager or anything else, which is how we enabled resource packs for Terraria by just having the path and letting it be redirected to anything we want. Basically, load from other folders, load without the content manager, reuse an asset that already exists, do something at runtime, etc., etc. So that has been really nice. You can always, one of the advantages with a singleton is that you know that everything is going through one spot, so you can replace the internals of that one spot and get more things. So it's not a sin to use a singleton for these things. Just wanted to bring that up.
So the second part to that question, it feels wrong. It's not necessarily wrong.
Yeah, that's very fair. And I just chime in too and say that in most of the games that I've had, the icons had a singleton too. There was like an icon manager that people just got an icon from the thing, and a lot of those the references were just like by an ID or a string in a database that was getting pulled in. So yeah, it's totally fine on your icons. I wouldn't worry too much about it, but there are lots of, I think, better ways that you can do it too if you're running into issues. That said, if you're not having any problems, just leave it and don't mess with it. Work on the parts that you're actually having problems with.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I just want to clarify. The only reason to not have paths and a singleton is that when you're having paths, you're having indirection. So if you try to move an asset, but you specified it by path, you now broke that connection and it will no longer be found, which means you have to chase down where the connection is. Having direct references in assets is way cleaner in that regard because you can only change the icon in that one place and it will be correctly replaced for everything. So just wanted to clarify.
So Andrew, I saw this question and I thought of you, but I have kind of an answer for it too. And it just says that it's about asset packs. If your package works built in URP and HDRP, but the scene is only for built in, like the animations and stuff, it's only really set up for the built-in version. How do you present the package? I saw some people mark theirs as not URP and HDRP compatible. And I assume this is just because the scene's not really set up for URP and HDRP. There isn't a version of it. Do you have a recommendation for this? What do you do if?
So
if
yeah, this is definitely a tough topic for publishers. I think Jack, I'm assuming we're talking about asset store packages. But
that's my assumption here.
My stuff is delivered in built-in. It works in URP and HDRP. So I don't say it's not compatible. In fact, I say it is compatible. But the URP, there's a button that you can use somewhere in the menus. I think it changed in a recent version, but there's a button you can use to upgrade all the built-in shaders to URP, and it will magically just work, which is wonderful. That doesn't exist for HDRP, so you have to find some basic HDRP shader and link the masks, the maps, all the texture maps, which is it's a hassle, but it's not the worst. And the big thing here is that if you use custom shaders, then you have to include URP and HDRP versions of those. If you don't use custom shaders, if you're just using the built-in standard shader, then you're fine. Your stuff will work with the other pipelines. You're not going to be making use of any fancy HDRP features, most likely, but maybe you are. It depends on how you do your maps. You're just making it so it doesn't. I guess in my mind, when I say it works, I mean it doesn't break. And I think that that's the important thing is, hey, I've got an HDRP project. Can I get this asset pack from the asset store without it breaking my project? The answer is yes, then that means it's compatible. Doesn't mean it's made for it specifically, like I can imagine an HDRP package that specifically is made to use some skin texturing system that HDRP has that, won't work in the others. And so therefore you'd say it's compatible with HDRP, but not the others. Does that make sense?
I think so. When you do this, like one of the things I've seen a lot is like I'll download an asset and there's a URP sub package and an HDRP sub package that has URP and HD versions of those. Does that something that you've seen a lot or recommend, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I actually did that a couple years ago. I was doing that with HDRP, but I stopped because the HDRP was going through changes and I didn't want to chase that. But I think that's a viable way of doing it. If like I've seen some packages in the store have multiple actual products, and oftentimes they'll have a free upgrade. So if you buy one, you get the others, and then it keeps it separate. You can just import the one you want. But if you include a Unity package that essentially will overwrite the important bits. So I suppose on your system, you probably have 3 packages, 3 projects up, one in each version, and you've just, the demo scene is the same GUID, same ID there. So if you bring in the new one, it replaces the existing demo scene with the correct one. I think that's a viable way of doing it too. In my head, it takes more like work to make sure it works, because now you've got to test that and make sure you didn't miss one part, then rather for me, I prefer just to not worry about it at this point. And I think at some point
people do the upgrade themselves.
Yeah. Recently, I did a survey on my Discord actually about what versions people are using, and about 60% are using built-in. So
okay.
I was thinking, should I start using Universal Render Pipeline as the default? And the answer is no, not yet. But
that makes sense, because it's easy to do the upgrade yourself. If you're using one of those, it's a lot harder to go backwards.
Yeah, it's much harder to go backwards.
Just to clarify on the menu change, so Unity used to have a button in the editor context at the top that let you upgrade materials to URP or HDRP. It used to scan the entire project and do that for you. Now they have just upgrade selected materials in case it matters. So you can do that and get them to any upgraded pipeline, but there is no back button. Beyond that, I do think that packages are useful for separating it. The problem, as you mentioned, Andrew, is that if you're using the same ID for the map, then you can't have multiple versions of it in your project. Some things that I've seen in one of the packages, I don't remember which one, is that they have 3 different demo scenes, one for each pipeline, and they note it down in the name. And then each package can reference that. In regards to making sure that as you load the asset in, there are no errors, using the sub packages is useful, because if you have URP or HDRP shaders in a built-in project, they will error on you. It's harmless, but it will. So that's something to watch out for.
Speaking of the scenes, I just wanted to mention that for anybody that's building an asset pack, don't save the sample scene in your asset. Don't export that. I don't know how many times I've gone in, started messing around in the little default scene, forgot to save it as something else, imported an asset, and it overwrote my scene. Because I didn't notice that they'd imported the blank empty sample scene, and I accidentally imported it over my little thing. I mean, obviously, never anything important, because if it was important enough, I would have it in source control. It's just little throwaway stuff, but playing around and doing a little throwaway thing, and I grab in some particles. I don't expect my throwaway scene to be overwritten. So please don't do that.
Similarly, it's a good idea to. I think a lot of people use the demo scenes from environment packages as kind of a jumping off point, which is fine. That's great. I did that for my game as well. But make a copy of that scene first, because if you ever re-import that package and you didn't make a copy, then you could overwrite your scene as well.
Yeah.
That's a like it's good best practice for a asset publisher to try to never screw with people accidentally by changing stuff that would change their scene. But with prefabs, it's very possible that I'll create an update to a prefab, add bones or do other things, and then suddenly you bring it in and things go wonky because you're using the same prefab and it got overwritten and you didn't realize it. And so copying prefabs can be a good idea too, and making prefab variants so that the changes you made aren't overridden when you re-import new stuff.
Yeah, I'd make a copy. Don't do the variants there, because then the base one changing could modify your variant still. Watch out for that. All right, let's take some more questions. This one came in both chat and in the forum, and we talked about it before, so I figured why not pop it up. They're asking if there was a difference between just Unity's version of C# and Microsoft's version of C#. And I think this is an interesting question that probably comes up because the answers kind of changed over the years. Andrew, you want to explain the details here?
Well, I'll tell you, I can explain that I don't know the exact details for this question, but I do know that for those of us who remember Unity script, may have started out thinking, oh, this is JavaScript because that's what it was called, and then found out later that it's not JavaScript. Now, luckily, if you were
I used to call it.
Yeah, if you were like me and you didn't really know what JavaScript was, you would have no idea that it wasn't, and then you just read it on the forums. But apparently, JavaScript was not Unity script, and Unity script was not JavaScript. But oftentimes, Unity script was called JavaScript, and apparently that ruffled some feathers for people who, knew that absolutely was not the same thing. So I do have a question about this, because I know. And forgive my naivety if that's the case here, but there are different versions of C#, and I think Unity is behind a couple versions. Is that not right?
Well,
it's correct.
Yeah. And in the past, it was much more behind, is kind of the thing. Just like with the JavaScript and Unity script, there's the .NET and the mono versions of C#, and they're essentially libraries and support for C#. They're things that C# runs on top of, and they were very different until somewhat recently. You want to explain that, Yorai?
Yeah. So going back to the core of the question, is Unity C# different than Microsoft C#? They're not. The only difference is Unity wanted to be able to support more platforms conveniently, and they started off with having multiple solutions and using a relatively old version of C# as their base. And because they didn't support anything new, you couldn't use newer C# features. The language evolves over time, and they add new patterns and features to the language itself. So Unity didn't have access to that.
And that was because they were using an open source version, right? The mono, and not Microsoft's previously closed source one, which is why they couldn't upgrade to make that support all the things they needed.
Yeah. And then over time, they realized that most performance problems would be solved if they just stayed with C# itself and not the alternative solutions. So then they moved only to that. And then because they were only on one language, they could upgrade to a different version over time. And they had this one huge upgrade to C# 7, I think it was the big leap back a while ago.
I think that's right on the number. Yeah. 6 or 7, one of those two.
Yeah, and once that happened, life on Unity packages became way more convenient, and a lot of improvements internally happened. And from then on, it's relatively a bit behind, but not that much. I think right now we're on C# 8, and C# 9 is in one of the betas, if I'm not wrong. The live version of C# right now is 10, so it's like one version behind, even though 10 is huge for relatively different reasons. And I think there's 11 in the alpha phase. But on the core of the question, Unity C# isn't different than Microsoft C#. It's just a version behind. And you use it way differently in Unity, which is the big thing that people don't look into when they ask that question. The patterns you have working with Unity are way different than how you would usually program a pure C# project. You don't get to create new objects yourself in the Unity space because the mono behaviors are instantiated for you, and instead you have an awake method that you can't pass arguments into, is one of these big changes.
Yeah, it's the language is definitely the same. It's those libraries, like you were saying, that you're getting one. Well, on the language, like you said, you're one version behind, maybe sometimes two versions behind, but they're relatively good at keeping up ever since Microsoft opened up their new. Sorry, ever since Microsoft opened up their stuff to be a bit more available for people. I think they open sourced the C# and the Roslyn compiler and stuff. Ever since then, they've been up to date, though. I've totally lost my train of thought. Oh, the difference is, though, what I say is that overall the coding is pretty much the same. It's just the libraries that you're using and the things that you're doing are very different. Like, would just like if you're doing enterprise desktop development versus web stuff, it's going to be very different things that you're interacting with. You're building web pages that respond to tens of thousands of people instead of one person on a system. And in games that you're dealing with tons of things going on and their libraries and all of the things involved in game development. I'm going to jump over to the next question real quick so I can get my thoughts back together. And this was one that we talked a little bit about yesterday, or not yesterday, last week or the week before. And I now have some answers, so I was curious if we could just run over it again. It was just if there are any suggestions to find or where to find artists for visual effects other than ArtStation, Twitter, and Reddit. So not for necessarily models, but particle effects, those types of things. Do you guys have some suggestions on that?
A very clear one, the asset store. Most of the artists on the asset store actually have an email that you can directly contact and ask, hey, I've seen that you make X and Y packages. Can you make X for my project? How much will it cost me? They sometimes even have a dedicated hire us page on animations specifically, not VFX. I think We Make the Game has even rough how much does each thing cost. So you can straight up see all the information, contact them, ask whatever you want, and figure that out.
I was thinking the same thing. That's one of the first things that I do is find the particle artists that I like on the asset store and reach out to them. I have two other spots that I look though. What about you, Andrew? You got any other suggestions?
I think that's a great suggestion, going to the asset store. I know I get people all the time asking me if I do custom things. Some demand that I help them, which is a bad way to approach it. Others will say, someone yesterday said, make this for me, please. I can't do it. Please just make this for me. And I'm like, no. But the thing is, I've never actually, I've offered to do custom stuff for people before. But then when I tell them the cost, they stop talking to me. It's like Tinder, kind of. But except for the cost thing, I tell people about costs on Tinder. But they stopped talking to me, and I think one of the concept to remember is that people need to get paid, so keep that in mind when going to the asset store. That these are people who are professionals. But I think aside from the asset store, which is a really good way of doing it, because you can see what they've made, is to go through. Well, the forums has a job posting thing, which works pretty decently in many cases. I think when it comes to something like particles, again, you should be able to see what people have made first. So, hopefully they'll be sending you a reel or some examples. Otherwise, I would say I like CG Trader. I've said that before. CG Trader for their hiring, for their escrow service that they use when you hire people. I don't know how it would work with particles for Unity specifically, since that is so specific to Unity. But I'm sure there's somebody there who would be able to do it. It's just I think the pool of available talent would be smaller than doing just 3D models or animations. That's much more like universal.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. It's a lot easier to find modelers than particle or effects artists. So I was thinking a lot on the same thing, the asset store, and then the other places that I've used in the past that have had some success were Upwork, and posted on there because you can put on there exactly what it is you're looking for. So say exactly what the particle is that I need, kind of loosely what I want it to look like, and where I need it to work, and then people will bid on it, or on Fiverr as well. But personally, my preference is the asset store, because you can find really good ones and find artists that you know exactly what their stuff looks like, and what it's going to kind of come out like. And you can support people that are working on the asset store. What do you expect to pay on prices on those? So say that somebody's got an asset pack of 50 particles and they sell it for $30, and you want 2 custom particles or 1 custom particle. What do you expect to pay on that particle? Well, is it $4 because it's like what would be like a rough idea, a range you would expect to see?
So I don't have much of an experience with hiring for VFX specifically, because I like to do that on my own. But I would expect that on general, if you're asking for anything specific, be prepared to pay at least 3 digits. And that's because the assets are usually going only to you and not to anyone else. One of the pitching for reducing the prices, you could probably add that to the package itself to increase its own value over time, which some packages will do, and over time they even triple their cost because they grow exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I wouldn't pay less than 3 digits if I'm asking for any specific task.
Yeah, it really depends on the ask as well. What you're asking for. If it's just like, okay, I need a really nice smoke particle, that's okay. Smaller than saying, hey, I really need a really nice fire particle, which
Or like a
includes smoke.
magic fireball with an explosion impact and a beam coming out,
Sure.
right?
And then if you say, well, now, but I also want to be able to customize the colors, and so I want it to be use shader graph so I can customize the colors, and I want it to do that. So depending on the ask that you have, it could go big. But I think in the end, it's going to come down to where somebody lives and how much they want to get paid for their time. Some places are going to be more expensive than others. Some are less than others. And to Uri's point, if you can tell them, hey, I don't mind if this is not exclusive, I need this, you can add it to your package. That should reduce the cost for a lot of publishers who know the value of being able to add something to their package. Whether that is a value to them or not, it's up to them. But I would definitely expect that any custom work should be at least 3 digits, oftentimes for if you're going bigger or more complex.
Well, you probably aren't going 4 digits on a particle effect, though, I hope.
Not if it's just one, but if you're looking for a variety of, a series of particle effects for, like an example, I've never found many good UI particles for the character portraits in the game I'd be working on. And that means that I need to hire someone to do it or do it myself. I don't need just one. I need a whole bunch. So I'm probably going to hire someone to do, 40 different particle things. I would expect that instead of paying, let's say I was doing $300 for one, I wouldn't pay 40 times 300, but I would probably pay a few thousand for sure to get that done. I would expect.
Yeah, that makes
Hi,
sense.
Dave.
And I would say I've done the same thing with asset store publishers plenty of times in the past. Or say, hey, we kind of need this. I want it to match what you already have, just be this slightly different thing. Totally fine if you want to add it to your pack afterwards, or reuse it. You just need it because it fits in the spot that I've got a use for it, and I need this done. And it's much cheaper that way. Half the price usually, or around there.
Yeah,
which is good. works out well, especially if you don't care if it's being reused. So welcome, David. You there with your tea?
Yep. Yeah. I'd like to say I was late because of my rock and roll lifestyle, but it really wasn't.
No.
That lie definitely would have passed, though.
I'm just getting old.
So I guess before we switch over to the next question, Dave, you got any thoughts on where to find artists for visual effects, particles?
Yeah, I mean, I've done it through several places. ArtStation, I've gone on and asked people there that I like their work and just trolled that particular site and other sites that have those sort of things. Sometimes you can go onto the asset store and they'll have a contact details there, and sometimes they'll be open to custom work. If you, I've just caught the end of that conversation. If you pay them properly, don't expect to pay the asset store price, obviously. And I expect Andrew's just gone over why you wouldn't do that. But yeah, so those sort of locations. I mean, a lot of times if I'm building a prototype or something like that, I'll just grab the stuff off the asset store and then grey box the rest of it in. But
yeah. Just to touch a bit more on the price point. Usually you're paying by either the project or the time, and if you're paying by the project, be prepared for them to tell you only get this many requests for iteration/editing. If they're paid for time, obviously the longer they take, the longer they get, so it probably pays off for them if you need multiple versions or iterations or what have you. So when you're trying to make the request, try to be as precise as you can about what you actually want to save yourself on money and mistakes on both parts, because even if you're willing to pay as much as it takes, it can get the artist frustrated if you don't communicate well on what you actually need. So that's pretty important.
That's interesting.
I was going to say, don't be surprised if you get back something completely different if you don't tell them what you want. I mean, that's kind of obvious.
Yeah, I would say go overboard on telling them.
Oh yeah.
Show examples, show what you don't like, specify, I do not want something like this, but also make sure you're telling them, do not want this. Make it red, make it obvious. But it's an interesting follow-up question to this is, when you pay people per hour or per project, there's different incentive. Now, we expect everyone to be honest people, and that's not always going to be the case, but we hope they are. But when you pay someone per hour, there is an incentive to maybe take a little longer. And it also disincentivizes, I think, someone who's kind of prolific at what they're doing. Someone who knows a thing really well tends to be faster with higher quality outputs, and might have a higher hourly rate. So it's an interesting thing. How do you approach when somebody comes to you saying, oh, I want this per project or this per hour? How do you approach parsing that out onto whether or not it's the right value for you?
So for me, it's a lot of it comes from experience, just of hiring loads, like hundreds of artists over the years to do thousands of jobs on different things. When you start off and you start hiring these people, you'll start realizing when you're talking to them how quickly they're going to create the thing and how close to the thing they're going to. So look at their previous work and say to them, how long did it take you to create this? What features did you add to this? Did it have LODs within it? Was it all high-res materials? Did you give them the source materials as far as the PSDs were concerned and all the rest of it? Were you able to come into Unity and do some URP work and some HDRP work, if depending on what project you were in? And were you able to do the import settings and help the person with that? Was there animation? Was there rigging? Look at the product as a whole that they've done previously. Make sure they've done the work that you're interested in previously, because I've had a lot of artists and designers and programmers before turn around and say, oh yeah, that's easy. I've done that stuff before. And then you give them the work and you suddenly learn that experience point of maybe they should have had that experience beforehand. And this is like hiring for a project where you're looking for medium or senior people. If you're hiring, you're bringing in juniors to sit under seniors and all the rest of that. That's very different. They've got to come in and learn from the people with more experience there. But yeah, for me, Andrew, it's looking at their previous work, asking them how long it took them to create that, and then doing a comparison. I have several artists that work for me as contractors, and I will span out jobs to several of them.
On that point, if they aren't willing to disclose this kind of information, it's something to watch out for in itself. There are people who will try to to skip over the details that you don't that you want to hear, but you know you won't like the answer to. So try to watch out for it if they change the topic or skirt over it. Is something that is a red flag. Usually, that would be if you're asking them two questions pretty close to each other, they'll only answer one and completely skip the other, or something like that.
Yeah, it can be an interview a lot of times, especially when it's a new artist that you haven't used before. It can be a back and forth, but you've got to be considerate of what the artist needs and look at that price point they're asking for. Look at what they can create and the time they can create. Ask them how much time they have to work on the product. There's a number of times I've gone to hire somebody and I've said to them, because of experience, how many projects are you currently working on at the moment, so that I can work out how quickly I'm going to get that. Because sometimes I just will ask an artist ahead of time and say, how long is it going to take you? Do you have time right now? And when can I get it by? Because they might be busy at the moment, but I'll be like, right, well, tell me when you're going to finish with that project, because I'll just wait for you to get on, because I like the artists I use. So I will take my time and wait for them if necessary.
And to put another point on that, even if it's an artist you haven't worked with before, they might have an overloaded schedule. There are plenty of Twitter artists that are like taking requests, but you're going to have to wait 6 months if you want to actually have it, and it's going to cost you the free 4 digits when you do. So just be wary of that. It's not everybody you're talking to are going to handle your request within the next 24 hours or your money back kind of deal.
Yeah, there's a big variance in artists, so just try out a bunch of them. That's kind of what I do. Find a bunch of artists, then find the couple that you actually like and work with them repeatedly. Dave, on the pay thing, personally, I really prefer just paying per project because it makes it easy for me. And then, like you said, if they're good at it and they work faster, the fuck do I care? Like, I don't care if they can get it done in 20 minutes. If they get the thing done, like, that's all I really care about, is that they got it done. The amount of time that they spent building it doesn't matter to me at all. So I really prefer just paying like a flat rate and find out what's good, and then I usually give them a little extra afterwards, assuming that everything went well. What's your general? Do you like to go hourly, or do you just do it like per project, or per piece, or like per batch of pieces, or?
It kind of depends. And there's several factors into this thing, but I usually ask the artist what they prefer and go with what they prefer. If they want to go hourly, sometimes artists will want some money up front because they haven't worked with you previously, and you can't be afraid to do that. Personally, I've been a contractor for many, many years, and I've had random people hit me up and ask me about, I want to build this project or that project. And I've said, well, I don't know you, so give me some money up front, because I'm not going to build stuff, send it to you, and then you just never pay. So you can't be afraid of that as well. The funny thing is, when you're asking an artist how long something's going to take, and then they tell you their hourly rate, you're kind of getting a fixed fee anyway. The nice thing about the hourly rate is if you turn around to them and say, oh, that was great, but can you change this? Can you change this? Can you change this? Can you change this? That hourly rate means they keep getting paid, because I want to keep the artists happy, because I want to use them again. If they get to the end of the project and they get a lump sum, and then you've got loads of things that you want to add on to the end, and you just expect them to do that, then they're not going to work with you again. Like,
oh yeah, no, on those I just pay them again. I just set up another, like, hey, let's do some revisions. How much for all of these things? Give them the list.
But yeah, I mean, a lot of times it really depends on what the artist wants. Whether they want to get paid straight up or they want to get paid hourly. Sometimes a project will be quite long, so even if they want a set fee right at the end, and that project's going to take 2 months, I will often turn around to them and say, look, do you want me to pay this in a couple of instances? And if I'm going to do a set fee at the end, and it's a bigger project, I ask for milestones, and then I pay at the milestones. So if somebody says, right, I'm going to create... So for instance, I had somebody create a spaceship fighter for me recently for a project I'm working on. And it's a very custom piece that was designed and made by a concept artist that I use. And I needed LODs, and I needed it all to work in game because my concept artist has massive amounts of polys when he does his work. So what I did is that person turned around and said, okay, I'm going to create 3 LODs. I'm going to create you this many skins for the fighter jet because I wanted different versions and all the rest. And I turned around and said, okay, well, look, do me the high-res version first without a skin, and then just send that to me because I want to look at how you've laid out the polys. I want to make sure it's going to work in my game, and I'm not going to get certain aspects of reflection and stuff like that I want. And then once they pass me that, I say, right, okay, there's the pay. And I put that in the contract. You get paid at this particular point. Great. Now go and produce me the skin for this. So they go and produce the skin and everything like that. That's awesome. Now you get paid. And that means I can iterate closely on those particular parts. So if they turn around and pass me a model and I'm like, whoa, this is 3 billion polys, you've got to go and reduce that. They'll go and reduce that down and bring me something a little bit neater. And then as they produce the LODs, I'll give them money for that as well. And then just tidy up at the end.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I actually got screwed by doing that because I lacked the knowledge myself on how to understand what I was getting for milestone payments. The first time I tried making my game The Barbarian, before it was called The Barbarian, I wanted customizable characters, and that wasn't available on the Asset Store. So I hired a guy to do it, and I set milestone payments. I think it was like $750 for this first one, for the second one, for the third one, fourth one, etc. And after the first one, I had a high resolution mesh, technically. But at some point, I was like, "Hey, when's the second one gonna be done?" And he was like, "Well, I'm doing a job interview in Las Vegas. By the way, can you forward me the second milestone? I'm almost done." And I was like, "No," thankfully, because I never heard back from him after that. And I was left with a male and female game ready model that didn't have any texture maps, didn't have anything I could work with, and I lacked the knowledge to understand what or why. And so where you say, well, you want to check the sculpt of the high poly sculpt to see how the polygons are laid out, I'd look at that and be like, especially at that time, I'd be like, I have no idea what I'm looking at. But the concept works. It's just I think you need to understand that, hey, if for some reason a milestone or 2 or 3 happens and I don't get to the last one, will I have value for what I paid? Can another artist pick up from this point and finish the job? Just so you don't end up screwing yourself in the process like I did.
Absolutely. And sometimes, especially if it's a new artist that I'm working with, I will lean the money. So the first milestone will be a small amount, and there'll be small amounts, but the last one is actually quite a big amount, because if it's, this is not just artists, this is audio engineers, this is programmers, this is anything. I'm not going to just pick on artists here, but I'll lean the amount to be back heavy rather than forward heavy. That way, when they get to the end and go, oh, well, I've just got to create this last LOD, but I'm going to get only like 10% of the pay, and there's this other thing coming up that I want to do. Well, actually, you're going to get 50% of the pay because that's the final complete thing with all the rest of it all in time. So you can lean those payments to kind of convince them to keep going on the project. Because you're right, Andrew, sometimes things come up and people are like, oh, it's not worth my time anymore, or I've got these family things I need to deal with. I'm not going to get this done. But sometimes if you lean the payments, they'll be like, actually, I'm going to work on this and get it done. And obviously, I said have family things. If they have family things, they say, look, I need some time. Give them some time. Be a human. Not like me, a robot. But I always have to refer to the wife. This person said that. She's like, yeah, this is how you should react, because I have no feelings or emotions. So yeah, no, Andrew, you're absolutely right.
Just to touch on the humanity aspect a bit more, make sure they are happy explicitly when working with you, because you don't want to burn bridges, especially if the artist has higher quality work compared to what you can find. Like usually if you picked someone, it's because you like what they're doing, and if you burn the bridge with them, you obviously won't be able to get it. Things happen. People might have mishaps that aren't in their control. So just be wary of that. Don't have no room for error, is what I'm saying. And when you're working with someone, try to communicate to prevent any frustrations they might have. If you had any bad experience before with another artist, make a note of that. Make sure it doesn't happen again with somebody else. If you didn't explain something properly, the artist asks you to include some further information in the future. Include that in the next request for anyone else, just off the bat. More information is better than less. Just try to make sure there's nothing that anyone can get angry over.
Yeah, give them lots of pictures, lots of concepts and stuff. So I want to jump over to a code question, and then there are a couple more art ones after that. So I think I wanted to see you guys' thoughts on this one. I'm kind of opinionated, but the question came in. It says, I'm still in the early stages of game development. I hate how I did spells. So I assume it's like some RPG spell casting game. Do I refactor now or keep adding features to make a more complete game? So early stages, you hate the system. Do you refactor it or just keep going? Thoughts?
It's a loaded question.
Yeah, and it just there's a few things in that. You're in the early stages of game development. I take it this is a personal project or a portfolio piece or something like that. If it is, and you've got all the time in the world to play, learn by refactoring. You failed, or you think you failed. Maybe do some refactoring and learn a better method. Watch some tutorials, try different ways of doing stuff to see what works best and what you think is going to work best. So if that's the case, and it's a portfolio piece that you want to show off to people, and you've got the time, and that's an important thing. If this is a project that's got to be in and it's got to be done, if it's working and it's not going to break everything else in the game, get the game kind of finished and then go back and do some changes if you've got the time to do it. But for me, if you're just starting out and you're learning, fail often, fail quick, and then change and learn more.
Some great advice. Anybody else got thoughts on that?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Andrew. So I want to say that iteration is key here, and when you say you hate how you did spells, I'd question whether it's the code or the features that the spells show up. Because when people tell me they hate something, I often find that it's not the code that's the problem. It's that they lacked like the oomph or whatever, the thing that actually makes the magic work, in this case, the magic. So you have to watch out for that, because sometimes even if the code is perfectly okay and intuitive enough, the feature itself is lacking what you actually wanted out of it. So refactoring isn't going to do anything. Making the code prettier for something you don't like as a feature is not going to change that you don't like the feature. Be wary.
Very good point.
No, yeah. Beyond that, iteration over the mechanics is only functional if you're not hampering the entire project just to do that. You can't take infinite time on a feature until you're happy with it, ending up with a god system or God knows what in the details, because you kept iterating and making it the best it can be, but you have no other parts in that project. So
You don't want to just have spells, nothing else? You can't move.
I mean, it can be the core of your project, and you could argue that having a good foundation is necessary to create a bigger, better, more complete game. But if it's going to take infinite time, you're never going to get a more complete game. So just to make sure that the parts that you aren't happy with are easy to swap out. And then you can work on the rest of the project and iterate on it whenever it becomes a problem.
So I wanted to steal a question from chat real quick. By the way, if anybody has questions in chat, feel free to drop them there, but also go drop them on the forum. The guys are highlighting the ones they want to answer and trying to pop those up. But I wanted to get this one because they're doing something in a game jam and they're stuck, and I figured maybe we can help them live. So they're trying to move a platform back and forth, and they want to know if you have any tips. So I don't know if this is 2D or 3D. It basically be the same for either. Anybody have a way that you guys normally just move a platform and then deal, I assume, with a character moving on the platform? That's usually the issue. Usually moving a platform is pretty simple, just going back and forth. You move the position, you could animate it, you could do some code to just move the thing. But it's getting the character to move along with it is 99% of the time the problem. Anybody got thoughts on that?
Question again, but let's go with that. So when you're trying to move two objects together, usually the beginner-friendly solution is to just parent the player to the platform, so that whenever the platform moves, rotates, whatever have you, the character is in perfect alignment with that. Now,
and you just do that on like a collision enter, right? Or like an on-trigger enter, you'd make it a child of the platform. And for this little mini game jam, this may be the solution. So go ahead, continue.
Yeah, so there's that, but it's not going to be a perfect solution, and you might notice some problems. For example, if you want the character to slide off the platform, it's not gonna, because it has no reason to, because it's a child. It's part of the platform once it's a child of it. So be mindful of that. If you're trying to do it with physics, usually the simplest solution is to just make an animation. Very easy to just open the animation window, hit record, move it to where you need it, move it back, let it look whatever you want, and then making sure the animator component is set to animate physics. And then you can add high friction to the platform itself, and it will just drag the character along with it. It's a very nice, very convenient solution without parenting involved. If you have any other big packages, for example, the kinematic character controller from the Ukraine Mega Bundle, it has its own solution for a moving platform there. Just look at the demo scene and you can see that. Yeah.
Oh, lots of solutions. I think that's good. I just wanted to make sure they got a quick solution that they can finish up the game jam and be successful with it. Just hit the thumbs up button after you win the game jam. Also, yeah, for everybody still watching, hit like, subscribe, and share and all that stuff. And I want to jump to a question for Andrew. And it says, question for Andrew. I noticed Infinity PBR makes a lot of detailed creatures. Are you the one to work on these creatures? Which I know the answer to. But the bigger part is, if so, how long does it normally take to create each creature? Also, is each creature or character expensive to make? So that'd be an if not. Right?
Yeah, there's a switch statement here, I think. I think so. First of all, I work with other people. I do some of the stuff. I generally would do the texturing myself, although I have hired that out as well from time to time, and not all of them I've done the texturing, but I will do that for a lot of them, especially the newer ones. But I don't do the 3D modeling. I don't do the animating. I don't do the rigging. I don't make the blend shapes. I do the Unity integration and the texturing. So there's a few of us who work on one character. It can take anywhere from not much time to a long time. And from start to finish, my characters can take years. I know I've got Hydra that has been ready for rigging for the past year and a half. That it just hasn't gotten there yet. Partly because I work with only a small number of people and we've got lots of things, so we prioritize. But if we were just going to work on it, it would probably take a few weeks to get the character created, a week or so to get the texturing done, depending on how much time I have, and then another few weeks to get the rigging and animating done. If we were just doing it by hours and quantifying the hours, I have no idea how many exact hours it would take. But it can be expensive. For something like a mushroom monster, which is a go-to simple character, I would estimate that would cost me about $2,500 to make, all in. That's if I try to include paying myself a little something, although I generally don't pay myself a little something. So these numbers are more about paying the other people to do it. And that's not including any sound effects, not including any concept art or music or any of the other things that might be included in the pack. For something like the humans or a dragon, something that has to be very specific to where if it's not quite right, people will say, hey, this is wrong. And things like a dragon or a human, those take much more time. And the humans, one human with all their wardrobe, the way I do it, without including its ability to work with all the other humans, that probably takes about $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 in the end to make, because there's just so much going on with it and so much that needs to be done, so much work that needs to be done. So it can be pretty pricey in the end.
Okay, I think that's a good answer. But yours are also super, super detailed. For people looking for lower detailed characters, they can come in quite a bit cheaper. just to note. So let's take a couple questions from chat real quick. First, these are fast ones. Would learning Link make me a better game programmer? Yes.
I like Link. I started using it not long ago, and I found it to be quite helpful. And now every time I Google a question on it, Jason Weimann's page on Link comes up. So
good. It definitely would. You just So one thing to remember is you got to watch out for garbage collection if you're doing it, or performance if you're doing it in something that's getting called all the time, something like in your updates. But in general, yes, learning link, at the very least, you should be able to read the statements and understand what they're doing, because you're going to come across it constantly. So I would learn it, get used to it, just start doing a little bit of practice with it. It becomes super powerful, and it makes it so you can do a lot of things that would take 5 to 10 lines of code in a single call or two. So it just simplifies a lot of the grunt work that you might have to do. Definitely should learn it. And then the other question that popped up in there that I wanted to grab, I just found out there's a new system in here to star and pin questions. So start using that. The other one was, I'm a junior developer and I'm having my first interview tomorrow, which I thought warranted popping up. And they want to know what they should expect. So they're going in for an interview tomorrow, their first interview as a junior developer. Dave, you've interviewed quite a few of these guys, quite a few junior developers. What you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, have you watched American Ninja Warrior?
Yes.
Because that's going to be in the car park. No, when you go into an interview, it depends on the person interviewing you. All of us have different techniques. With games interviews, a lot of times they'll give you a test beforehand, and there could be several different tests that you can get. For instance, you could just get a C# test, you could get a game developers test, a Unity test, a math test as well. Don't be afraid of the tests. A lot of times, if they're done correctly, they're trying to work out where you are in your experience. So if you can't answer something, don't panic about it. It's really just, where is this person in their experience? So we can gauge as an interviewer where you are and where you would fit in the team itself. So never panic when you're doing the actual the questions and before the actual interview itself. Then after the question portion of the interview, they'll come in and they'll sit down and they'll have a chat with you. They want to make sure you're not a psychopath, that you're going to fit in with the team itself, that you're going to be able to communicate with the other members of the team, that you're a friendly person, you're not overly aggressive or anything like that. They're also going to talk to you about the questions you just did. Oh, you answered this on this question. Why did you answer it that way? And they're going to draw out more of where you are in your developer experience. And again, never be scared of these sort of things. The other thing to expect is you should be asking them questions. They're interviewing you, but you're interviewing them. You want to make sure this is a studio you're going to want to go and work at, because you might be there a while. You're going to make sure that this person that's interviewing you is a person you want to work for. You know, are they an arsehole? Nobody wants to work for arseholes.
Sometimes people with no job in their first one don't mind.
True. Yeah.
I hate to be the one to say it, but I've known plenty of people who are like, I don't care that they're an asshole, I'll take the job. I just want
take the job.
But yes, in general, you don't want that.
You don't want to work for arseholes. And also, make sure you're taking lots of notes. The one thing I do say to everybody that's just starting out in interviews, as soon as you've left that interview, write down, what questions were you asked in the test? What questions were you asked in the interview? What were your responses? How did they react? Then when you get the result back and they say whether you were accepted or you were not accepted, mark that down and then think about, how could I have answered this better? And ask them what made them reject you. If you got rejected, hopefully you won't get rejected, you'll get accepted. But ask them, okay, I'm sorry I didn't get the position, but can you give me some feedback as to why? Can you give me some feedback as to how I can improve? Can you tell me when I could interview again for these positions once I've made those changes to improve myself? They might turn around and go, well, just look out for the post when we're going to post another one. And that's a common answer. But make sure you get lots of feedback. You're improving as an interviewee to get the best job. So, it's an iterative process, and don't be afraid if you don't get your first job from your first interview, because that happens. And try not to be nervous about everything. Think about it as it's a learning process. They're not there to catch you out. They're just there to see how good a fit you are, and maybe you're just not a good fit for that team. So don't take anything personally. It's the business. And carry on.
Yeah, I think that's all Yeah, pretty on point. Expected to be tested, some sort of written or oral or whiteboard test, depending on what the situation is there, or even just actual code. My favorite are when you actually do some test on a computer, because it's a whole lot easier when you've got your just normal environment and you can kind of see it, and you don't have to make assumptions and forget things. You don't have to auto correct and auto spell. Like it just works, right? And it gives a better idea of what your skills are. But that's pretty rare that you see that. Usually it's something like the whiteboards or the written down questions or the straight just asked questions. One other thing I always recommend for people, though, when they're going into an interview is just research the people that are interviewing you. That way it'll at the very least make you a little bit more comfortable, because you'll know a little bit about them. You won't be walking in not knowing who the person is, like in this group of people that's interviewing you. You'll know what they look like. You'll know kind of what their experience is, what they've been doing, and having a little bit of insight into who it is that you're talking to before you talk to them, I think is super handy. When you're going into interview with them, like you're giving them all of your info right off the bat. Like you're sending them, all your experience and the relevant stuff, and all of their stuff is probably public and available. So you just got to go look that up and kind of get yourself on the same level. So, like, did this person, has this person just been working in games for the last 6 months and they're relatively new to this stuff too? And is that the case? Or they like released some of your favorite games 25 years ago and now you're finally talking to them? Like you get a good idea of who they are and where they are. And I think it helped a lot with the conversation. Helps a lot with just the whole process and the comfort.
And as you get more senior, you'll get different types of interviews. So when you start out, when I started out and the interviews that I had with a lot of junior developers and all the rest of it, it was just two people in the room. So they'd come into the room as an interviewee, they'd sit, I'd give them their code questions and I'd give them their math questions. And then we'd leave the room and we'd let them just do it and just sit back for a bit. Then I'd come back in, I'd take the questions off them, I'd pass them to the other guy, he would leave, and then I would start chatting to them, get to know them a little bit. And then once I've got to know them a little bit and the other person's finished their questions, they'll come in and then they'll pass me the question sheets and we'll go through the question sheets with the person. And I'll give them the answers and tell them where they went wrong and what they could do better and all the rest of it as we're going through that, because that enables me to see how they respond to feedback and what I can get from that. And that was the structure that we used at Sony. Well, I used at Sony for 5 or 6 years when I was hiring teams there. It changes as you get a little bit more senior. I went for an interview probably about 10 years ago when I came over to America, funnily enough, and I flew to a certain city to go and do it. I'm not going to say what the company is or anything like that. But when I turned up, I sat down with a person and they were describing to me what my day of interviews was going to be. And so when I went in there, the first interview I had was just somebody going, this is the day you're going to have, how you respond to this, what you're going to do, da, 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 da. And then the next interview, I was taken into a room where they gave me a marker. There was a whiteboard behind me and 5 people sat in front of me, and they quizzed me about what I did with certain things. Then that was 2 hours. And then after that, somebody took me out for lunch and they questioned me on my management style and how I hired people and how I dealt with problem people and how I went on through the management style of things. And then the next thing I came back and it was another 2 hours, but more on how I design and I concept stuff. And that again was a whiteboard session with 5 people sitting in front of me. That's an incredibly senior interview. I've only ever had that once. It was possibly the hardest, most grueling interview I've ever done in my life because it was basically a day. And also I had to get on a flight and fly out to do this. But yeah, interviews can vary quite a lot when you go and do them.
They're normally not quite that bad. One other thing, actually, there are 2 things I want to make sure to mention. Is one, that sometimes when you're interviewing with people, like Dave said, you were interviewing early on when you were at Sony, right? Kind of in your, I assume, relatively early days. I know that I was allowed to be in interviews when I probably had no place being in interviews when I was still a junior developer, because nobody really wanted to do interviews. Like there were some people that had to do it, like needed to do it. But if you were willing to and interested, like you could pretty much go in and interview people. And I think that also helps a lot if you just kind of look into who you're talking to, understand who they are. Like they could be, they just started 6 months ago in the position that you're applying for, and it might help with the conversation, might give you some more context into what they did to get in those kinds of things. And also, the other thing I wanted to point out is if you don't know the answer to something, like you just don't know it, the correct response is to just lie and pretend you do, right, Dave?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You just bullshit the whole way.
No, just slap the interviewer
that they're wrong, that you know it.
Slap the interviewer. So no, it's to turn around and say, I don't know the answer to this, and then have a conversation about it.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I'm kind of curious how that works.
Yeah, exactly.
You can explain it right now to me.
You're not expected to know everything. Even when I go into an interview now, I don't expect that I'm going to know everything the person throws back at me, because it's not going to happen, you know. And the right answer is, I don't know, but let's have a conversation about it. Yeah, tell me what the answer is in your opinion, and also just go through with them. Like, again, it's a conversation. The conversations are two-way. Yeah. If you turn around and go, I don't know, next. Whoa, red flag. Like, you're there to learn as well as to build. If I'm hiring a junior developer, I do not expect them to know like 20% of the stuff I'm going to put out.
The worst is when they say that they know, and then you ask them, and then they just make something up, and you're like, you could have just said no. Like, because the problem that you get there is that then you know that when you ask them the same questions as an employee, they're going to give you the same shit. They're going to tell you that they know how to do it. They're not going to know how to do it, and then they're going to fail at it, and you're going to have to try to figure out why. So you want to make sure that, like, if you don't know how to do stuff, like, say you don't know how, and look for the answers. There were one more question on the interviews. Actually, there were two more on the interview thing. I just want to follow up and finish, and then jump over to other things. But what one was what kind of math questions? You'd mentioned that people get asked math questions in these interviews.
Yeah, I mean, you can think of everything. Think of the job you're applying for as a game developer. You might get asked questions on matrices or vectors or circle theory. Again, you're not expected to know all these off the bat. A lot of times people will refer and go, I've used this. And this is a trick. If you're interviewing at a place and you don't know the answer to something, but you've used it in the past, because sometimes people will say, okay, I've never actually handwritten that particular math question before, so I can't answer it that way, but I use that library. Write the library in the instance you used it in, because as an interviewer, I'll turn around and go, oh, so you have used it before, you do know of it. It's the people that go, don't know, and move on. I'll be like, does that person know? Now, I'm a good interviewer. I will ask you questions on, have you ever used this before? Can you give me an instance of where it is and all the rest? But not everybody's going to do that. So if you get a math question or a Unity question or something like that, and you're not quite sure on it, put something in there and then talk about it in the thing, because you might suddenly go, oh yeah, it's this and this, but the question was badly written in the actual thing. But yeah, math questions are what do you do in your daily life as a game programmer, and how can you actually, I mean, we don't use math questions as much as we used to.
It depends on the interviewer and how old they are and how good they are at writing questions.
Because I don't have math sheets in there anymore. Like, I used to have a math sheet and a C++ sheet to ask questions of. Because,
like a little workbook that they got to go through and fill out all the math questions.
Basically, back then, there was the standard template libraries and there was some other stuff, but we didn't always use those because they were a little bit overkill when you put it into the game. We had to worry about memory and size of game and all the rest of it. So you were expected to know that stuff. But nowadays, it's less, especially at Unity, where there's a lot of that around. I will put things in there and I will ask questions off that, but I don't just have a sheet of math questions or questions on reversing strings and all the rest of that stuff. I will basically give you straightforward questions. And this is something to the interviewers out there. Give relevant questions. Like, don't just give things that are going to stump people. It doesn't make you a big person. Like,
don't give things that you're never going to use, like reverse a string.
Oh,
and then ask them to tell you something other than dot reverse.
The amount of times I go into an interview and they're like, can you show me the Fibonacci sequence? And I'm like, why? I went into an interview once, and okay. So when I said don't interview for arseholes, I'm an arsehole, but I'm not an arsehole to the people who work for me. I'm an arsehole to people that just annoy me. And I went into
So
one
as long
interview.
as the people that work for you don't annoy you, they're good, right?
Yeah, basically in a nutshell. But I went into an interview, and this guy turned around and said, "Right, okay, I'm going to ask you some questions." And there was the CEO of the company had asked me to come in and interview for this, and the guy was sitting there. And he's laughing as I'm talking to this lad. This lad's like, "So show me the Fibonacci sequence." And I went, "No." And he was like, "What?" I went, "This is a two-way street. I'm going to interview you to see if I want this job, and you're going to interview me to see if I'm going to do this job. Tell me a problem you're having right now, or tell me something that you're doing that's relevant. Unless you're doing something on the Fibonacci sequence, why are you asking me this question?" I was in a bad mood that day as well. So don't do that in interviews, by the way. Please don't do that in interviews. Don't be that arsehole, because I'm just that guy who's just like, I don't want to really do this. But
yeah, don't do that if you actually want the job, for sure.
Yeah,
or you want to work there again.
The CEO was wetting himself by the end of the actual interview. Because, and by the way, I said that, and then we went into something the person was having a problem with, and we went over that, and we built out the solution to the problem he was having, and I got offered the job at that particular location, and I got on very well with the interviewer by the end of the thing. I have that personality. I can turn that around and do those sort of things. Don't do it if you can't, because like you will come out like a complete arsehole. But yeah. So to the interviewers out there, ask relevant questions. If you're hiring for a Unity job that has nothing to do with the Fibonacci sequence, don't ask the frigging Fibonacci sequence. Ask something that's relevant to the game you're doing. Okay, now you want to cascade through several children of a particular transform node. How are you going to go through and get one child, and then that child's going to get the next child, and that's going to get the next child, which is what they're asking you to do in the Fibonacci sequence every single time. There's a little hint for you. They're asking you to do recursion and all the rest of it. But just give the person a relevant thing. Like, you want to go through all the transforms in this particular, under this particular parent, and you want to do this particular thing on those and look for this particular component or whatever. Ask a question that's relevant into that sort of thing.
By the way, if you're going to approach a question about recursion like Fibonacci, just don't use recursion, because everything that can be expressed with recursion can be expressed without it, and recursion is bad. And you can be meta and explain that as you write your solution, if you actually decide to play along.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think the problem with that interviewer is he was just out of college. And he literally, that's all you do in college, isn't it?
So here's a question for you then, Dave. This one lines up perfectly with that. I consider myself a junior to mid-level developer. My project's picking up, and it seems I'll need to start hiring a few senior developers. Any tips for interviewing devs who are more senior than me? It seems like
that's literally what I was just answering. So ask them relevant questions as to things you're doing, and see how they respond to it. I hire people that are more skilled at me in several different positions. Like, I could do art, I could do 3D modeling, I could do animation, all the rest of it. I am not a good artist. I'm not what I consider a good artist. I could do stuff and produce it out there, but I'm going to hire much better artists than me. So when I go into interview somebody, I will tell them what I'm doing, and I'll see what response they'll come back with it. As far as programming is concerned and developers, I mean, when you go in there, tell them what you're working on, see their responses, show them some of the stuff you're doing, and see how they would do it. Ask them whether they would end up refactoring the entire thing you've already made, and if they wouldn't, and what they would do with it. Have that conversation with them. You're not going to be able to answer them big showstopper questions that you know the answer to, but they don't, potentially. Also, don't pretend like you're a much more senior coder than you actually are. Be honest, because a lot of times if you're a junior to mid-level coder and you aren't honest about that, the person's going to turn up to their first day, start looking through the code and go, oh, what have I signed myself up for? As they look at this stuff and think, okay, a lot of this is wrong. So have an honest conversation with them about the level you're at and what they can bring to the team when you hire them, and look through their experience and ask them questions that are relevant to their experience. So this is another interviewer tip. Ask them questions for things they have done in the past, not aspirational questions or how would you deal with this scenario. It's not how would you deal with this scenario, it's how did you deal with this scenario. It's actual instances of things they actually have done, because that way they'll give you real answers. They won't just give you full on bullshit, potentially. So yeah.
Just to add on that, I actually had to deal with hiring myself recently, and one of the things that I explicitly try to do is figure out if the person I'm interviewing thinks about the projects they've done before, what would they have done different or better, and can they articulate it to me? Because if a person doesn't critically think about what they're doing with the work, that's a red flag in itself. So that's something to think about. If you've ever done work before, think about how you could have done that work better. Because if you get asked about it, you don't want to get stumped.
And if you can't come up with an answer, there's a problem.
Yeah. Self-critique and desire for self-improvement are big pitches for a hiring conversation. Also, for interviewers, try to be explicit about the level of the team the person is getting hired into, because if you're hiring someone who's a higher level than you, they might not be interested in not having any companion on their level at all. So showing that there's a match is going to increase confidence. Just say, yeah, we do have people around the level that you've expressed having, or we have people who are kind of slightly below you, but we're looking to improve our standards, is a big pitch, because they might feel like they have impact from that. Yeah.
So Andrew, can I ask you a question real quick about the asset store?
Sure, why not?
So someone purchased a 3D asset, not a human, from the asset store, and they want to know how much risk they're at if they use it in their game and they don't even change the textures. They just take their asset and they put it in their game and release it. Are they going to jail?
I mean, depends. Is it clearly stolen from World of Warcraft?
That's a good point. So,
I mean, assuming it's not, it's a legit 3D model, which most of them are. I think
almost all of them would be, right? Occasionally something bad sneaks past, but in general,
every once in a while something will sneak past, but they'll get taken down eventually too. But there's no risk. I mean, it's really a judgment call on your taste. Some people really want custom stuff in their work, and I think, for me, I don't care. I went, I told the story earlier about getting screwed on those milestone payments. And the next thing I did was go to the asset store and buy a 3D model human, a barbarian package, still in the store, from Polygon Maker, and I named my game the Barbarian because of that. So, I made the decision. I was coding around the fact that I didn't have a human, and I was like, well, this is dumb. So let me just get it from the asset store. And the game, I eventually replaced it with my own humans, but use the asset store. I think the problem is, it costs a lot of money. We talked earlier about how much it costs to make stuff. It costs a lot of money to make custom art. So if you're thinking of, there's a risk involved with, other people will see that I got something in the asset store, maybe. But if your game's fun, it doesn't matter. And if your game is going to make money, right, maybe through a Kickstarter or through early access, and you're bringing in some cash, you can then start replacing those models. So if you're thinking, okay, well, I've got some characters from the asset store and I kind of want to replace them, but I don't have the money, great. Make your game fun. Make it, to the point where you're bringing in some money some way, shape, or form, and then start replacing them. It's just so much cheaper to get to the point where your game's fun and it has some legs on it with asset store content, and not worrying about other people saying that they've seen it before. There's going to be people out there who do that. There's going to be trolls out there who see an asset from the store and say asset flip, even though you've made a game
Just using a sword or a character.
Ignore that stuff because the reality is you're making a game, and if it's fun, nobody really cares in the end. The real players don't care.
But in general, the license allows for you to do this, just to clarify for people,
That's
right? Like if you buy an asset on the asset store, you're allowed to put it into a game and release it. You're not, however, allowed to just release the actual asset art file itself. So you can package it in your game, but you can't go, here's the game, and then, oh, here are all the source assets you can download. You can't do that part. But you can put it in your game, again, assuming that nobody snuck in some WoW asset through without somebody noticing or something.
Yeah, the point of the asset store is commercial work. That is the point of it. It's for helping people who are making commercial games make those commercial games. You, of course, don't have to make a commercial game, but you can and you should. And realistically, I think the only thing you can't do is kind of NFTs because that's the same as flipping in the end. But
yes. You're just selling the art.
Yeah, sell the art. You can't be a reseller.
Just to note, there are some 3D asset stores, and this isn't the Unity one, that actually have IP in them. They sell things that are from other people's IP that they've created. So, and they note that. So, for instance, some people use Turbo Squid, which is an asset store that you can go and get 3D assets from. But you will find that some of that is IP, and it's noted on the asset, this is IP. You are not allowed to sell this particular asset because they'll have Mario or they'll have Luigi, and they're just selling the 3D model there as a version that they've done. But you can't then go and make a game with that in there and say this is a legitimate game. It's
realistically, that person probably isn't even allowed to sell that.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. If you see something and you're like, oh, this looks like Link, then don't use it because it's Link. And other people are going to say, hey, your character looks like Link.
Yep.
It reminds me of when I bought baseball stadiums online. I bought a couple of different realistic baseball stadiums online, the models for a couple $100 a piece, and then got a cease and desist from the MLB like a couple weeks after release for using their stadiums. Apparently, the place that I bought them from was not licensed to sell them or do anything with them.
That's a really good point. Architecture, design of products is copyrighted. So cars, for instance, don't put a Porsche in your game. You will get in trouble for that because the Porsche is owned by somebody. And
like a Porsche, right?
Yeah, you need
your modified one
version of these things, or get a license from the company to use it in your project, which you can do. You can get those; they exist.
All right, so let's jump on to imposter syndrome. I started learning game dev 2 years ago. I still feel highly unqualified. How do I make a career in this possible without waiting a decade to feel qualified? I think it's cute that they think that waiting a decade will make you suddenly feel qualified, or that suddenly, like, all of a sudden, you're just gonna feel qualified for the jobs that you actually want. I never feel qualified for the positions that I actually am interested in. I always feel qualified for the things that I don't really want to do anymore.
Yeah, because it's 2 decades. It's 2 decades, right, before you feel qualified. Correct.
I thought it was 3. I'm still waiting. 3? I haven't hit it yet.
Oh damn, I'm close.
You guys got thoughts on this? Go ahead, Yar.
Yeah. So just to touch on that. The reason you feel unqualified may just be that you didn't get asked about questions that you are qualified for, and you only look at the parts that you don't know over the parts that you do know. 2 years is a lot of time to learn if you've used them effectively. So try to prove yourself that you can actually make something from start to finish, something that is releasable, that someone else can try out and give you feedback on, because that would be a very concrete proof that you are qualified to do whatever you're doing. Game dev is a huge field. There are a lot of things that a lot of people don't know, or at least don't know to a level that they would feel qualified, but that's just because there are areas of expertise. So try to figure out if you have one, and if you think you don't, choose one and chase that. It's not going to take a decade. None of this can take a decade by itself.
I did an interesting experiment once with somebody who turned around who was a junior dev and said they felt really unqualified and they were suffering from imposter syndrome. And I said, right, okay, write down all the things that make you think you're unqualified. So they went down and they wrote all the different things that made them feel unqualified to do the job. And then I went through those things with them. And I said, okay, well, look, you said you feel unqualified because there are coders that you're working with that are doing things that you've never heard of before. That doesn't make you unqualified. That just means you're learning, and everybody's learning out there. And then we went through the other things like, oh, I don't feel like I can talk to this particular subject, which makes me feel unqualified. Well, why not? You could talk about the experience you've had up to this point and the things that make you feel unqualified. You could talk about those as well. Like everybody has that. So sometimes just writing those things down and saying what makes me feel unqualified, and then literally debating yourself on those. Like you write down, well, I'm watching these videos from Jason Weimann, Jason Story, not me, because, but you're watching these videos and they know so much more than I do. Well done. They've been here decades. Like Jason, look at how grey his beard is. Like you can, like, yes, you might feel unqualified next to him, but he's been doing it for 20, 30 years. Once you've been doing it for 20, 30 years, you'll be in his shoes. You'll probably be able to do the same thing he does. As Euro says, if you devote yourself correctly to your art form. But sometimes just feeling like you're unqualified doesn't mean you are. Write down, say what makes you feel you're unqualified, and then do a pros and cons on it. Like literally work through it and see if you're not. And if you're not, then maybe you just want to put more work in, as Euro says, to that particular area of your skill set. And sometimes that will enable you to work out where you want to go in this industry. Because you might turn around and say, well, I'm a really good coder, but I really can't make art and I want to do this. And if everything's about that, well, maybe you should start looking at being an artist because it sounds like you've got a bit of a passion for it. Or maybe you should address that and say, should I be getting in art from somewhere else because I don't want to go down that route? And then you're not unqualified, you're just a coder. That's how it works.
That's all good advice. And my general advice is just get out there and start doing it. Start applying for jobs and start actually working in the field. You'll find that a lot of the time at least in my experience, when I've started jobs, I found that I knew a lot of things that other people didn't know that they knew a lot of stuff I didn't know, a lot more than I knew that they didn't know. But I would still occasionally know something that other people at the company didn't know, kind of with those specializations. You learn things and you're able to share some of that info, and people will have that same feeling because you happen to know whatever that random thing is that they don't know. People think that like I was better I knew more than them because I knew stuff about databases, when I knew absolutely nothing about graphics. And I was like, oh, they know more than me because they know all about this fucking rendering pipeline. They've got this down, like, and they're like totally opposite. And we both had like the same impression of each other, but just we had different skill sets and different experience. And you'll find that when you get in there, it's a lot more chill, I think. And just I would just start applying. I always tell people like, just get out there and start. Don't sit around and wait. Just go. Just get out there and try applying. There was one other question about who the awesome dev at the bottom right of the screen is. I think they might have it flipped.
Yeah, they've got it flipped. He's called Jason Weimann. He's on that
David
side.
Green. Warped Imagination is his channel. It's, I think, linked down in the description below. You can see the little logo there. Go check it out. And when you code, do you do it on a schedule or does your mind tell you marathon time? For me, it's always marathons. It's always I have a code I need to do, and I code until I get pulled away or I can't do it anymore. I don't know about you guys.
I run into the problem where if I know I only have an hour, then I don't want to start because I want at least 2 or 3 hours straight that I can focus on something. Even if it only takes me 30 minutes in the end, if I don't know that I have that time, I don't really want to start it, which I think I should start it because sometimes you only have hour segments here and there, but I want that time to start and finish it and really get my brain into it. Otherwise, it's so much harder.
I get the same way. I won't start like a 20-minute sprint. I need at least an hour or two, minimum an hour, but usually like 2 or 3 is good.
My
I
wife
am
will drag me out kicking and screaming like a toddler out of the room sometimes because I'm meant to be at dinner with another couple or something like that, and I'm just sitting here coding away, like well in the zone. She's like dragging. She just grabs the back of my chair and just pulls it away from the actual keyboard.
Mine just walks in and drops a baby down on my lap. I can keep coding with a baby on my lap. I'm good to go. It gets difficult. One-handed code, like trying to hit play and then trying to click fast enough. It's tough. Probably have unit tests for that.
I tend to have a very strict schedule for stuff, so I code when I can. But if I have free time, I will try and marathon as long as I can. Sometimes for going sleep, I actually stayed up to like 9 a.m. coding something this weekend. But I am very prone to sprint challenges, as it were. If somebody brings up an interesting topic in a Discord conversation and I'm like, I'm not sure I know how to do that, or I am sure I know how to do something that they claim is difficult, I will literally boot up a solution and just try to type it out in like 50 to 20 minutes. And just to have the conversation go on and like somebody come out with a solution or I come out with a new problem to think about. And I'm very, very prone to that.
I get the same thing. Do you do the same, Dave?
I used to do it a lot more. I've set myself a bit of a schedule now because I suffer very heavily with insomnia. So I was finding that sometimes I'd be up for 2 days, 3 days straight because I was doing coding and stuff like that. And obviously that is not healthy at all. And I won't tell you how I used to do that. But the... yeah, I know, Jason knows. But basically, I have a schedule now to make sure that I can keep myself in a healthy state, because this is also something to be aware of. When you're younger, I used to code for days on end, just literally. I used to be nocturnal for a very large period of my life. I was actually a nocturnal person. I woke up in the afternoon.
Here, like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock afternoon, wake up and then code until 4 in the morning.
Yep, that was it. So I was nocturnal throughout university. I had to change that when I got a career, obviously, because I did used to work for people. So I had the 9 to 5 and stuff like that. But yeah, I used to code until the night. But then later on in life, to get a little bit more healthy, I started to give myself a bit more of a schedule and to know when I can get lots of big marathon coding sessions in. So I would block out time in my life to make sure that, okay, Monday, I'm not going to book meetings with people in there and I'm going to go to this particular thing here and make sure I've got nice big blocks, turn off email, turn off the other stuff and sit and code hard. And sometimes I'll let that roll over a little bit, but to make sure I'm not going till 1 in the morning and then thinking about it till 4 in the morning and then trying to get some sleep and knowing I've got to get up at 8 for a meeting with somebody in England or something like that. Sometimes your life will dictate how much of a marathon you can actually do.
Yeah, it tends to happen. You get older, marathons kind of disappear.
I should probably touch on something here. I said I stayed up to 9 a.m., but I usually start working at like 4 p.m. I work towards the night, so that's something I should probably clarify. My sleep schedule tends to be in the daytime to the afternoon. So do with that what you will, working remotely.
I love that. I used to love being a nocturnal animal. It was the best.
Yeah. I don't know. I enjoy the sunlight here now. So I feel like moving to California killed that for me. It started as soon as I moved here. I started getting up early because it's always sunny in the morning. It made it easy. So there was another question here on marketing. Before we answer it, though, I wanted to just ask everybody to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and share the stream. I actually have a video coming out shortly after this. I need to finish the description and all that stuff, so I'll post it. If you guys are interested in seeing that, make sure that you're subscribed so you actually get the notification for it when it goes up today. Do you have a video coming out today, Dave?
I do. You're going to put your video out exactly the same time as me, and all the people.
No, mine's going to be later today. It's going to take a few hours. I need to finish uploading it and put in the description and all that.
Yeah,
we'll link straight over here.
I've got a really, really hacky video, and I'm going to put hacky in quotes there because I basically it's that Wordle clone video that I told you about last week. I have that coming out, and it's long. It's really, I'm so sorry. It is so long. It's like an hour and 45 minutes.
YouTube will love it.
Yeah,
As long as you turn monetization on.
well, yeah, some of us have a massive audience. Some of us are very niche and specific and to have a monotone voice that nobody wants to listen to for an hour and a half.
The opposite.
So I got this clone out. It's basically I was on a plane and I got really into Wordle. If people don't know what Wordle is, you put in a 5-letter word. If you don't know what Wordle is, you're living under a rock. Go and play it. But basically, I got on a plane and I didn't have Wi-Fi, and I was like, I really want to still play Wordle. So I had Unity on my laptop, so I created it. So I built a really dodgy, hacky clone of it, and then I just played. Got really bored with it really quickly because it turns out that 24-hour limit of each word is kind of vital to the game itself. But yeah, got really bored of it. And so I then kind of hacked the game to put an attempt button in so that I could just press attempt and then the game would actually fill in words for me and learn off the letters that had been placed before it to actually fill it in. So I completely destroyed the Wordle game by building a clone and then hacking it to bits and making it terrible.
That's what happens. It happens to me most of the time when I try to clone something. I clone it, and then I'm like, well, I wonder if I could like make this just play itself, so I don't have to play it anymore to test it. And then it's no longer fun to play. Which reminded me of something people asked me about before on just working on games and whether or not it's fun. It's a lot of fun, but it will definitely kill your love for the game that you're working on after a while. At least for me. Maybe not. Your I think is opposite, but for a lot of people I know, like they work on a game for too long and eventually they can't play it anymore. It just kills it. But yeah, I'm sure your eye is the opposite of that.
The opposite, quite. Okay, so I do love Terraria. I love Terraria a lot. There are parts you learn to grow very frustrated with and want to like overhaul them, which is a trap in itself because you end up with more work on the game. But I want to say something very applicable here about making the game play itself. It's actually a really good practice in programming because you first make sure that the game can actually be played by something that is not a player. You don't rely directly on the inputs. That's one part. The other part is you see your mastery of the game if the solution is actually good, depending on how complex the game is. So one thing that's really applicable here is in Terraria, there are a bunch of blocks and a bunch of interactables, and there are a ton of items, and there are different ways to use each item effectively. And when the console version came out, we figured that aiming is not very precise. It's really difficult to aim at single blocks and try to use the tools effectively on them. You can't mine the air with a pickaxe. Nothing will come out. So the console port team did a thing which was Smart Cursor, which aimed at the blocks that you want to mine, or rather in the forward direction of your aiming thumbstick. And I was asked to make a version of that for PC without seeing that other code. And I had to start thinking, how do players actually use the pickaxe the best way? Like, how do they like using the pickaxe? And there are so many things that go just into that kind of thing. Do you mine when you mine straight down? How do you mine effectively? When you mine downwards diagonally, do I actually care at the direct angle they're aiming, or do I want to make clean stairs so they can go back up cleanly without like broken pathways? Also, for block placement, you can make it straighten out gaps in the floor. And for planting saplings, you have to make sure there's enough space for a tree to grow. Otherwise, why would you even put a sapling in there? So I ended up with like a system that has 30 different item handlers that figure out if this item is good for using for this task, pick the best item that is actually good for this task, and make sure it picks the best spot to be used. And it's like my own personal favorite pet project in Terraria right now. Anytime I get to work on it, I'm like super giddy and happy to figure out how to best use the item. And I make sure it gets updated so it always matches the code of the actual item's execution. Like trees require 20 blocks of open air. So I make sure that saplings don't actually suggest that you place somewhere they can't grow because there's no 20 blocks of air. I know I can blindly say, if the smart cursor suggests it, I know it's going to work. It's like
You just have
super
it be
sense.
intelligent all in there. Yeah, that's for me. What I ran into with this was that I would do kind of the same. I would just want to solve problems and work on the game and never actually want to play it anymore. For every game that I've worked on that I actually liked playing before, every time I would start playing it, I would want to go add something or change something, and I would never get back into actual playing of the game. I wanted to pull this up though, since we're talking about Terraria. Though it finally came. I don't know if I showed you guys. I think I showed you earlier. This thing is extremely heavy for the weight that it says that it is, and huge. I got to figure out a way to put this sucker up on the wall, and then I can chop some stuff off. I've been running around chasing my wife around the house like a weirdo with this just for fun. Yeah, I like to mess with
He's
it
the
on
final
occasion.
boss.
Just like just pop up randomly in the room. Just like, what the hell's going on? And now the toddlers just want to play with it, and they want to. Yeah, it's dangerous.
And then the police got called. There was a whole thing about it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I know. I told my wife if anybody ever shows up outside, I'm just gonna run outside with the sword. They might not be scared because the sword's scary, but they might just assume that I'm insane and run away. I know if I saw some weird dude with a pink sword,
running around with a cat
after
on
me,
it.
I'd run the fuck away. Like, I'm getting out of here. It'd be perfect. I love it. So I got to get that sucker up there. So here's the question I guess we never got onto, which was how much money and time do I need to spend to market a successful game? This was one that was submitted on the forums, and I don't know. Was that Andrew? Did you mark this one?
I thought it was an interesting question because there's angles here to it, and I think the one answer is no money, but probably time.
Lots of time,
Lots of
or
time.
no time and lots of money.
I mean, because obviously virality is a thing. Now, I don't expect anyone's game is going to go viral. That's not realistic, although it's possible. But my understanding of what I know I did wrong and what I think people should basically do is, as you're developing your game, market it. Put it out there, have a webpage, show some screenshots, show videos, put them on Reddit, put them on your Discord, have a Discord and put them on Discord. Get a Steam page early, so that people can follow that game as you progress, so that what you're really trying to do, and successful is subjective, but if you're trying to say make money when you have your game and have people actually buy it and say this was fun, I'm glad I bought this, then just do everything publicly so that when the time comes, people are ready to go. People are ready and primed and ready to click that buy button day one. And hopefully they've given you feedback too. I mean, you may have had an open beta period where you allowed people to play it for free and give you feedback. So I think it's more about time, less about money.
Yeah, people need to hear about the game before. It's very rare that people just hear about a game and right when it comes out and they jump on it, unless it's something that's super popular. But usually in that case, a whole bunch of other people have been waiting for that game for a very long time, and it's highly anticipated. You've really got to, I think, advertise and market it as early as possible. And for the money part, I have no idea on that. I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that. No. I know it's expensive. If you want to just dump money in, you can dump in as much as possible. The super big, really popular games dump in amounts that would blow your mind and make you throw up, like daily amounts that are insane. So
the one thing to be careful of is don't throw money at inactionable statements. You want to make sure that if you're throwing money and someone sees your ad, they can do something about it immediately, either buy the game or wishlist it or whatever have you, but they have to be able to do something, not just watch. Saying, oh yeah, that looks nice, I'll forget about it in 5 minutes. It's not going to do anything for you.
Right, on an ad or something, yeah. Definitely make sure that they're you've got some call to action, something that they can actually do. You're not Coke, where you can just pay a bunch of money and have people see your brand and do that over and over and over, or GTA, where you can just put up an ad, and people know a new GTA is coming. You've got to be focused.
Another thing that could be useful for marketing is cross proliferation, or whatever you call it, when two projects try to synergize with each other. If you have a product that is similar to another one, try to figure out if the audiences would like to play both, and you can actually approach the devs of that other product and figure out if you can do something cool with them. Crossovers are fun too in that regard.
So I wanted to pop up that article that you sent me, but this comment just made me laugh, so I had to pop it up. Give a man a game, he'll have fun for 100 hours, teach a man to make games, he'll never play a game again in his life. Definitely happens to a lot of us. At least you play a lot less games, right? So let me share this. There was an article that you linked, and it sounds...
I just wanted to comment on it because it's a funny memory, not a very fun thing that happened. But when we talked about the Meowmere sword that you held up and police would come, there was actually a case where police looked up something about the sticky bomb and Terraria's page came up, and they actually read that in whole serious manner. As part of the process there. So I wanted to bring it up. It's an old article. It's like 10 years old now. So
sticky bombs are a type of explosive crafted from one bomb and 5 gels. Oh, now you're giving away the formula to all the bad guys. Now they're going to know. Oh. All right, let's see. I think we had a couple more questions. Jump over to them. Oh, there was one about object-oriented programming. I don't know how you guys feel about it. I personally am a big fan, but the question reads, how do you guys feel about object-oriented programming? I feel like it only adds complexity for no reason. Now, before we answer, hit the like, subscribe, and share buttons. And ask questions in chat if you got some. I'm going to keep an eye on there too and pull them up as well as in the forum. So how do you guys feel about object-oriented programming? Have you guys ever done anything other than object-oriented programming? So, I mean, that's a point. There are a lot of people who never have. All they've ever done is object-oriented programming.
So I completely disagree with the notion that it has complexity for no reason. There is one very clear reason that it exists for, in my opinion, and that is human readability, human intent.
To reduce complexity.
Yeah. The entire purpose of it is to be able to make statements that humans can read, think about, and write properly.
Yes, understand. Right, is to be able to map things logically. I mean, have you guys done a lot of like functional programming?
I approached it. I don't have a very good recollection of how to compare them nicely. I did do a lot with ECS recently again, so there's that. But I would say that just in general, my preferred approach is object-oriented programming if I don't need the performance.
What about you, Dave? You want to go back to C, or are you thinking assembly?
I'm thinking Haskell, actually. Not Pascal, Haskell with an H. Yeah.
Oh, we have to talk about Pascal in a minute, too. Continue that.
Do we?
Yes, there's something important I need to talk about with that. But keep going.
Taking me back so long. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've done Haskell, like decades. Right. I don't want to age myself too much. But yeah, no, it reduces complexity. I like object-oriented programming. Job done.
I generally agree. Yeah, it makes it easier to understand things, map stuff, and not have to think of memory locations.
Yeah, I mean, there are reasons to have functional programming, and they're very legitimate, and they're very good, and they're long math equations and all this sort of thing. Go and look into it. It's super fun subject to get into. Not so much Haskell. I mean, you might like Haskell as a language, but ouch, it really hurts my head. But yeah, I mean, I don't do any of that anymore.
Right. Now let's talk about Pascal, because you said Haskell and it reminded me of something that came up this week that I need to talk about. So my 13-year-old right now is writing JavaScript, right? I keep trying to get him to do some C# game stuff, but I think the problem is he does game mods, and there's so much way beyond where he could get at with starting a new game that I just struggle to find it interesting. But he's really into JavaScript stuff and writing web pages. I had him make me a page last week, threw it up like in a few minutes, had it up and hosted with a database. Everything worked and made it nice and pretty and reactive and stuff. I was pretty freaking impressed, right? But then it got me thinking about the schooling stuff. So he's finishing up middle school and going to be going on to high school now. And I got an email same week, like 3-4 days ago, with registration info for like register your kids for the next year. So I decided, let me look and see what computer science classes they have. I'm really, really curious. 4 fucking Pascal classes. I'm so confused. I'm going to email him because I'm really confused, but I don't get. Maybe there's a reason. There are 4 classes on Pascal. Maybe there's something like that going on, but
yeah, it's probably an applied. Because I would have thought it would be an applied one, and they're doing it as a subject matter on something like, I think Lego used to have a Pascal. Correct me if I'm wrong, chat. Like this is going back a while, but I believe the old Lego systems had a Pascal language you could write in to program the controllers of them.
Yeah, like I said, I planned on emailing them because I just want to get a little more info and see if maybe there's just something I'm missing. But it seemed like it was way out of date. Like Pascal isn't something like, until I read that, it wasn't something I'd even seen in probably the last like 5 years in writing, maybe like in a survey or something randomly. But it's something that, I haven't heard anybody talk about writing code in decades. And even then they were talking about how they used to write code in Pascal.
Right? Yeah, but you know how often they update the curriculums of these school classes.
Which made me wonder if maybe that's the case too, in which case it's a curriculum that might need some serious updating. So it just kind of got into my head, and you reminded me of it.
We started doing Pascal and things like that back in the day, so...
I thought maybe it was like as an intro thing, but then I think like this kid can already like set up JavaScript servers and do all this other stuff that they're probably not gaining much, or if anything, from that. So kind of curious. Like I want to find something where you can really kind of push and advance those skills and do things that are like get you a job out of high school instead of having to go learn how to code afterwards.
Pascal will give you a good foundation on a few things, but the problem is you're not going to get many schools that teach C because it's just might be too far for the kids. So they want to give them something that's applied. Pascal has a lot of application stuff to do with it, like Lego and things like that. I really think it was Lego. I'm trying to remember where I was using it. I think I was using Lego. I think we were doing robotics projects with Lego and the controllers were written with Pascal, something like that. Anyway, so if they can apply it as quickly as possible, it's the best learning material, as you'll know, when you're teaching young kids or anything like that. So sometimes they head towards those things. It wouldn't be too bad. But there's lots of things you can get into now.
Yeah, I would push them into either JavaScript or
Java.
C#. JavaScript, Java, or C#. Probably JavaScript, and then maybe do some. I mean, personally, I'm super biased, so I would do some game stuff in C# and Unity, of course, because I think that would appeal to students and teach them the skills they need to be able to at least apply and start getting junior developer jobs. If you do that 4 years in high school, you should be able to apply for junior developer jobs, assuming that you're passionate about it and doing it outside of school too.
I mean, we were doing C, Pascal, Haskell, 2 different ones, and Java throughout a lot of the schooling that I was doing back in the day.
TypeScript. That's every time I say JavaScript, my son always tells me that he writes in TypeScript, not JavaScript. Now that's his new thing. So the comment there just reminded me of it, so I had to pop that one up.
There is something I want to bring up though regarding using Unity for 4 years in school. one of my friends is in university and he took a course in Unity, having not done game dev before. And dear God, they skipped all the fundamentals in there. So there are all pitfalls with that too. They didn't teach him how to use prefabs, no version control at all, even though they had to work together. So they ended up zipping 3 GB projects and sending them to each other like that. It was a horror show. It was really, really difficult to figure out that most of what he's learning is from brackeys and not the course itself.
Yeah. Well, I found that to be the case even from CS graduates a lot of the time. Like they learn very little like at actual school, and it really comes down to how much they're investing outside of school to learn the important stuff. Some places teach really well, but most of them, like, it's so rare that I find like a new developer who actually knows what source control is or why they should use it other than their boss told them they had to.
My own experience when I was in school, and granted I'm younger than you, so it wasn't that long ago, was that I actually managed to use everything I learned effectively without a lot of problems going outside school. Granted, the book material wasn't very much, but the teachers would actually point you at things to look into if you're interested in self-study. So
right, that's the part that's important, is that self-study part and being willing to do it, because the peers that go there and don't do that end up I think way behind. But that's good to know that at least your stuff was relevant. All right, let's
somebody brought up metaverse.
Oh, we can talk about that in a second. First, Andrew has a question on whether or not people can use his assets as in-app purchases in the game. So kind of clarifying, we talked about you can't resell assets, but if you have a character that you can unlock in a game, can you use the assets for that?
Yes.
Like it's a new skin.
Yeah, I would classify that as like a traditional in-app purchase. Somebody pays 99 cents and they can now use the thing in their character, and that's that. I think what you can't do is relicense it. So you can't say, hey, you just paid 99 cents for this. Now you can transfer it to somebody else who didn't pay 99 cents. Now you can create your own mini game inside this game like Roblox does. And, now you can make a game that you release to other people, whether you're making money or not. So all traditional in-app purchases, perfectly fine. Newer stuff that's more modern and, Roblox-like or play to earn NFTs like, that's relicensing. You can't relicense. So you can't give other people control over the content, essentially.
Right.
In that regard, should we... Oh, there we go.
But was there something else you wanted to jump to? We can do that instead of this question first.
Well, I just wanted to bring up that I did actually get to try Andrew's assets, so I figured we could probably go over some nice things regarding using any assets from the store at all and common problems that you might find.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. So at the beginning, you'd mentioned that you tried out Andrew's Minotaur asset that's part of the bundle that's linked down below. I'll drop it in chat too. And that's on that $40 Ukraine bundle with a ridiculous amount of other stuff, right? So yeah, tell us a little bit about that experience. What was it like using Andrew's stuff? Did it blow your whole computer up and you had to get a new one now? Play and
I'm right here. I can actually still invade Jason's own room, Elden Ring style.
Still Jason's storage room.
But yeah, so
you just need like a fire background now. Tried Andrew's pack.
Tint myself red. Invader. Yeah, so I got to try Andrew's Minotaur pack from the Ukraine Mega Bundle. I basically got the bundle, then it gives you access to all the other assets to buy them with zero cost. I got the Minotaur on, I imported it into Unity, it took less than 2 minutes. The import went perfectly fine. I did get some errors on import, but that is because the shaders for European HDRP were included straight up, and the project wasn't built in. They didn't have the necessities, so they just complained. It was harmless. I dropped the Minotaur into a scene, and it worked perfectly okay. And then I started looking into what's in the actual model to look for all the usual pitfalls that make me say, well, this is a really nice model, I can't use it. It had none of them, and I was like super impressed. So yeah, so here's the first thing that I tend to watch out for when I get any model from the asset store. And it's probably something that not a lot of people even care about, but there will be models that have a minus 90x rotation, if you've ever seen that when you import
All
them.
the time.
Yeah. So this is a sign of badly exported FBX files that are not aligned to Unity access. And usually you'd think, big deal, just a minus there. But it tends to screw up a lot of calculations. And here's why. When you're trying to say, put something in local space forward, that rotation gets in the way. So you can't put something like in the character space conveniently. If you're trying to use Unity's cloth component, it actually relies on that. So you can't use Unity's cloth component correctly. If you're trying to use the skinned meshes, have a bounds section by which they do culling. If the rotation and all of that is wrong, the bounds would be wrong as well. Therefore, the model would go out of view even if it's supposed to be on screen. So that isn't okay. And all of that was done perfectly okay in Andrew's model. So there's that. Now, the second thing is, usually some models that you'll import from the asset store would come with a 0.01 scale. Did you ever see that? Models that are
Yep.
try to have like 100 scale
Or
import.
a 100 scale.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, so all of that is just another sign of badly exported models. And usually that happens, I found, from Blender default settings. All of these issues occur. You can actually customize it so most of them don't happen. But if you have that wrong scale, Unity's cloth component would screw up too. So the model was in a perfect 1:1 scale, so I was very happy about that. Next, I figured, okay, so this is a really nice Minotaur, but how much customization does it really have? Does everything Andrew's video have stand up for it? And it does. All the models are separated by side and by feature, and you can toggle the mesh renderers on and off individually. They all have just the blend shapes that they need, not a bazillion blend shapes they don't need. So that's amazing. And the nicer part is, it actually came with a component to manage the blend shapes in editor mode with just sliders, and it applies to all the renderers. And I was like really nicely impressed with that. It was a very nice convenience feature just to see everything working with less than a minute. So all in all, very, very impressed for a model asset, having not used one of the packs before with the level of research that I did. So yeah,
yeah, that's
just
really
wanted to
cool. I
say.
wanted to pull it up so everybody can see the pack you're talking about too.
Yeah.
See it actually playing while you're explaining it. You got all kinds of cool stuff in here.
I just want to clarify, I'm not sponsored about this at all. I got the Ukraine bundle just like anyone else, and I just tried it out because Andrew's a friend.
It's true, and he didn't tell me about it until this morning. Well, actually, he did, but I just didn't check the message on that he tagged me.
Yeah, I sent him a message that I tried it, and he didn't see it until moments before the show. So
yeah, and he had criticisms too about the scripts, and it's I read through the criticisms earlier, and I could sum up them as a combination of two things. One, I'm better now than I used to be, and I'm still getting better. So I'm still learning on the scripting stuff, and also a lot of my scripts are kind of they're older. Like they started out like the Blend Shapes Manager, the first version of that I probably did now 5 years ago, and it's been updated periodically. And I think I've gotten actually an update that I haven't yet pushed out on that I'm working on that will make it even better and fix some of the problems, but probably not all the problems that you identified, Uri. A lot of the problems were things like, oh, these are public when they don't need to be public. Methods are public.
no, that's not a problem as much. It's just a review of, and I wanted to bring it up actually in the show because there are times when you want to expose certain fields for others to consume, and it's worth debating whether some of these are and some of these aren't. It's just a fun talk. So
yeah.
Just to clarify, so Andrew's packages come with a lot of auxiliary assets. There is a blend shape manager, there is an audio clip combiner, there are demo scripts for camera movement and particle systems and stuff, and you can use all of
Weapons
them.
and armor.
They're all optional. I didn't notice such a component for that, but basically, because there are many random various scripts, it's worth looking at how their features work. And they're tended for editor use. You're not meant to consume them as part of the game beyond the blend shape manager, supposedly. And because you want it to be easy for someone else to consume your code, I found that a lot of public fields tend to be like really open about it. You know exactly what you're getting out of changing certain fields. So somebody who wants to use unrespect literally just drags the script in and says field dot whatever that component dot whatever do what I need. Useful, intentful, questionable on whether you need that level of exposure for everything. In this case, I agree it's perfectly fine. Just there is a case for general game components that expose things that they don't need. For example, letting in a classic combat game, letting somebody directly edit an enemy's health instead of saying take damage or heal or whatever. By directly changing the health, you're not letting certain events unfold if they have to. For example, if a boss has to be never dying, always minimum of 1 HP, making an explicit take damage method will let you add that code in without anything else breaking. No one can go edit the health directly, so they can't break the enemy saying it's 0 and dead. So
Right, and then have everything bug out, which happens all the time as projects get bigger too. Like that was one of the things that happened when I first started working on MMOs. There's so many things that were overly accessible that you weren't supposed to use that I didn't know about, and people would accidentally do things the wrong way and then find that caused a bug somewhere else later all the time. So it's certainly an issue. So I didn't mean to interject and jump in there, but it's something that I remember seeing all the time. And this is Andrew's character in the editor. This is the one that lets you adjust blend shapes and change animations and swap out armor and all that stuff, right, Andrew?
What the video you're watching right now?
Yeah, that's what it's showing in here.
That's actually the old demo scene video. I need to update that video. They now look prettier. But yeah, the demo scene essentially is there just to show you, with the UI buttons what it can do, and it uses the blend shapes. So the blend shapes here uses that system to run it, and the wardrobe in the demo scenes right now just toggle them on and off using the built-in methods. But one of the updates I'm working on now is an update to my wardrobe manager. I've actually changed the name of it because it's more than just a wardrobe manager. It can manage any sort of objects and prefabs on any parent. And so one of those things is wardrobe on a character that you can easily just call a line of code and once it's set up and turn things on and off, turn groups of stuff on and off. And so the once I finish uploading that, technically I need to go back and update all the demo scenes to make sure the demo scenes use that script. Though that's going to take a while because there's like 40 characters, and just updating 40 characters is a 2-week process of I can't do anything else. I have to only update these for 2 weeks to make sure they're all on the same page before I do any other changes. And inevitably during that process, I'm like, shit, I need to make a change. And then I have to redo it, which is
redo the whole thing again. Yeah. I can totally see that. And it'd be super slow, especially you got to go through, update a package, upload the package, do the whole change. Like, there's a lot there. So one more question on your animations, Andrew, that popped up, if you don't mind, was about the rigging of armor. So it said, I have a question about Andrew's assets. How do you go about rigging your armor for characters? You can only find tutorials on character rigging.
Yeah. So for wardrobe that needs to be worn, that needs to be deformed with the movement of the mesh itself with the character, has to be rigged to the same bone structure as the character. And that is why if you go to the asset store and you look at the clothing section, the armor section, you're going to find a whole lot of hats, a whole lot of things you hold in your hand, and a whole not lot of things you wear, because every wardrobe item has to be rigged to a specific body, not just a humanoid bone structure, but the actual size of the character. Otherwise, it's not gonna fit. So you have to rig the armor with the character in mind. And you can do that with my stuff. So that's what we do. Of course, we create armor and using the character, and we set it, and then we create blend shapes so that the mesh morphing works. And that's all something that people can do for themselves. You just have to follow the same conventions. You need to rig the armor to fit the character first. If you want to use blend shapes, you have to add those and make sure those fit on every blend shape. So then at that point, you have to use our blend shape naming convention. Otherwise, the script won't recognize the names and won't work properly. And then you know in the game, I've got an equip character script. You probably didn't see that in the Minotaur because it wasn't there. But there's an equip character script. That's one of the things I'm updating now. That basically takes a wardrobe and copies the bones. We were talking about this briefly last week. That copies the bones to the character. So if you put on a new chest plate armor, it has its own bone structure. You run the script, or you use my wardrobe script, which does this automatically for you, and it copies the bones over and relinks the wardrobe bones to the human bones. Uri actually had when we talked last week briefly about this, he started some wheels moving in my head, and I went back afterwards and I updated that script, and this is part of the updates. So now my new script will actually add bones from the wardrobe to the character as well. So, which is great because that was one of the problems I had been facing, and all you said was like one line. I forget exactly. You said one sentence, and I was like, "Wait a minute," and that did the trick. But so you have to manage the bones essentially. So you have to rig it to be the right rig. You have to skin it to be the right skin with the character. Then you have to bring it in using some method of copying those bones to the character, and then it will work perfectly fine. So it's just a 3-step process.
Yes, and also if you're using Blender, there are a bunch of helper tools to make this even simpler. Specifically speaking, on any rigged model, you just import it into Blender, you make your model. Supposedly, if you have the base mesh in the scene as well, you can just make sure it fits perfectly fine there. You're just making your model alongside it. Then you can use a modifier called weight transfer, which will actually let you transfer the weights from the model into the closest vertices of your of the original mesh into your mesh. So it will all fit in and be weighted relatively good. For metallical parts, you might want to go and weight paint a bit by yourself. And then, because Andrews has a bunch of blend shapes, there's actually a package on Gumroad called Shape Transfer, which is really, really good at making all the shapes of one object be applied to another object that has different geometry relatively nicely. So you can make the entire process of even working with Andrews blend shapes like 5 minutes for your own model. And if you have your own bones for the model, that's going to be what Andrew said, that you're going to have to transfer them via script. But it's really not difficult.
Yeah, and I have a script that will do it for you.
Makes it easy.
Yeah.
Just use Andrew's script.
Yeah.
All right, we're getting close to the end of the show, the last half hour or so. So I wanted to open up the giveaway real quick before we jump over to the next question. If anybody is interested in winning a free copy of Rider, it's a 1-year license that they give us for free to give out to viewers who are interested and want to win. All you have to do is choose a race and or class. If you don't pick both, one will be randomly assigned. And then we'll start off the battle in about 15 minutes and let it run through the last 15 minutes of the show. So if you're interested in winning, now's your chance. Just type something in chat for the one that you want to be, and then we'll kick it off in, like I said, about 15 minutes. I'm going to shrink it down so it might disappear for a little while, but just know that your calls or your attempts to join are being received. Yeah, I'm going to hide it so that we can be big again. All right, back to us. So questions. You guys got any more on this, or should we jump over to the next question now? I've got a couple pinned. All right, I got a few pinned that Eora had pointed out. First, we had one on how do you specialize or begin specializing when you aren't truly sure which direction you want to go in. I'm in the jack of all trades trap currently, but it's because everything kind of interests me. So how do you decide on a specialization? Has that happened for you? For me personally, every time I've had a specialized in something, it was because I kind of fell into it and that was the need. So I learned it and specialized in that thing. But what about you guys? What was your path or your thoughts on this?
On my own end, I ended up being a control freak about wanting to have everything in the games I modded be perfectly adjusted just the way I wanted. And because game modding didn't exactly let me do that, I ended up going into developing. And when I developed, making just art isn't going to work for it. So I ended up looking into the code that is needed to put everything in the right place at the right time. And I just ended up becoming a pure combat-oriented gameplay programmer. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah. For me, it was, I started off just focusing heavily on gameplay code because that was what was needed. And then on data stuff because that was what was needed, and just kind of specialized on whatever it was that was really needed where I was. What about you, Dave? You do a lot of everything too. So, but
Yeah, I mean, I have an interest and I need to know everything and learn everything. So I just try to basically as much as possible. Yeah, I mean, I started out doing radar, spatial geographical models, mathematics for radar systems. So that's completely irrelevant to anything, but well, except that job. But when I moved over to Unity, well, not Unity, sorry, when I moved over to game programming, I was actually doing some Maya stuff for big simulation for aircraft simulators. And luckily, building the API on for Maya for all the modelers and designers, I got a chance to go work at Sony. And doing that, I got the chance to sit with artists, like super big, famous artists in the industry and designers, and learn off them because I had to learn how to do the modeling and do the design myself to build the tools and make them better. In doing so, I got to have a go at all those things and got a taste for lots of little tiny bits. And I never let that go. Being a tools programmer, you kind of start learning all the various parts. And yeah, I never left it. Hence why I now do little bits of robotics and hardware, as well as doing the coding and the design and the art and management stuff. So,
all right. I think that Andrew, did you have anything to add to that, or should we just jump over to this next one?
We can jump. I just started doing the stuff that I could do and paying people for the stuff I knew I didn't want to do or couldn't do, but just keep doing that.
That's the way to do it. So, I guess before we take this other question, looks like we're up to 76 people in the giveaway. Again, if you want to enter, just type in a race in the class and chat like everybody else is doing, and hit the like button for superpowers. And then let's jump over to this, a more technical question for Yori. What do you think of using properties and backing fields in Unity? I use a lot of backing fields because I want solid principles in C#. So here they're talking about having a property with a field behind it. What are your general thoughts on this? And I think just general property usage overall. Like, how do you guys use properties? How do you feel about them? About having them as a way to expose something publicly, or having logic in them at the more extreme level? So where are you guys at?
I tend to think that they feel nice. I'm not generally very attached to using them. I will use them when I really need to just expose something, but I don't want anything else touching it.
So you want to get only properties that are exposing it, like readable but not modifiable, right?
Yeah, exactly. I tend to not include public set for those properties unless it's directly towards a presenter, which is something that Jason's story actually opened my eyes to. You can have set only properties that are saying, well, I'm going to want to present this value to say this health bar. I don't need to know what it's actually supposed to be showing. It's going to set its own values to say a Unity slider when I set that in the property. That's up to that. I am still on the fence on whether I like using that more than explicit set whatever methods, because that lets me know that logic is actually getting executed beyond just a field. But yeah, I use them for the most part.
I agree on the setters. I generally don't like to use them because I don't know that something secret's happening, or I'll forget a year later that the setter doesn't just change a variable, it does something else. And this is a format that I use all the time for publicly readable things that are serialized. So that don't break me game object would be some serialized field reference to an object that you don't want them changing externally. And it would have a semicolon at the end, but it's just an expression body get only public property, so you can read it but you can't change it. And just give everybody who's a little unsure a little code example of that, see what it looks like.
On the level of isolation, it's probably important to note that interfaces can have properties, but they cannot have fields. So by wanting to separate things out, you tend to be forced into the pattern of using properties for certain settable things.
Yeah, that was my experience too. I wanted to do a lot of interfaces, and it pushes you right towards properties. So I like using them personally. I use them for a lot of stuff. What about you, Dave? Any other thoughts on this?
No, I agree with you both.
Okay, nothing to add there. Fair enough.
Nope, you've said it all exactly right.
Cool. Well, I guess I'm almost ready to kick off the giveaway. Were there any other questions that have popped up in chat that you guys want to make sure that we get to? I've been trying to mark them, but once the chat started going with the giveaways, it got a little bit difficult to keep up.
Yeah.
Because here was one about assets and whether or not you think it's worth investing in some Unity assets. So when you're starting off, do you think it's worth investing in some Unity assets, or are you advised to do everything from scratch and use free available assets? And my opinion is it depends partially on like where you're at financially. If you've got a spare $40 that you're not going to care about, go grab like that Ukraine bundle or one of the Humble bundles or one of the other crazy bundles that pops up and get a large amount of art, if that stuff seems like the kind of thing that you would be interested in. Because if it's not, you just wait until 2 weeks or the next month, and there'll be some other bundle somewhere where you can get a large amount of art for relatively cheap. What I like to do is just get the things that are a great deal, so that I can use them. But I don't think that you necessarily need to buy a whole ton of stuff, because you'll find that most of the things that you buy, most of the assets that you grab, you're probably not going to use unless you bought them with a specific use in mind, ready to use them right away. Buy a whole bunch of stuff in bundles and not use most of it. But when it's a really good deal, I still like to grab a bunch just so that I have things kind of available when the thought pops up or when I want to start working on something. What about you guys? So think of somebody like that's new getting into game development, and I guess is this more of like a good financial investment to dump money in? Because that's really how the question is posed, not as a, hey, Jason, you like to buy a bunch of crap, would you buy it? Which is almost always yes.
My own take is very opinionated towards understanding why you're even buying assets for. Not that it helps because I have a bunch that I never use, but basically, when you're buying an asset, you're buying a pack of stuff someone else made. Do you need that other stuff? Do you learn from it? Does it solve any problem for you? Questions to ask yourself before you're dropping money on it. Your financial situation does matter a lot, but if you're going to be spending hours trying to solve a problem that somebody else solved for $30, maybe consider not wasting your time if you can afford it. For art projects, if you can't make them by yourself, and you know that those take hours because they tend to be linear work, doesn't matter how good you get at programming, it's not going to manifest the solution instantly for the art part. So I do drop some money on those, but I understand that it's just a pack of something someone else made. It's not some magical something I can't get on my own, and it doesn't solve anything I can solve by myself. It's just a skip on a part that I'm not confident I can do quick and well. And something to watch out for with that is let me think about how to articulate it better a bit, I guess. Sorry.
No, it's all good. I wanted to, if you don't mind, just mention that with the assets, because when I was reading this, you kind of popped something into my head on the code assets. I was 100% thinking about art assets and art problems, but when you start talking about it, it reminded me of there are a lot of times early on where I bought code assets to solve a problem for a project I was working on, and it just fucking worked. Like I didn't have to do much else. Like I got the asset, I implemented it, spent maybe 2-3 hours figuring out how it worked, and it solved the problem and let me move on to the next thing. If that's the case, if it's a thing like that where it's a technical thing where you're not sure even how you would do it, somebody has a really nice solution on the asset store for $20, yes, I jump on those all the time. Grab that, try it out, and see if it's going to save you a large amount of time, or if you can learn something from it, or at the very least, you end up not using it. You might take some of the art assets from it, but usually just drop it in and save yourself a ton of time. Go ahead, Yuri.
So the thing I didn't know how to articulate, I just wanted to make sure I'm being very explicit about it. The advantage of dropping money on the asset store versus freely available assets from the internet is that you get an explicit license that says, yes, you can use this commercially. You will not get in trouble for using this. The asset store is also good about updating assets that infringe upon that say upload World of Warcraft models, as Andrew mentioned. They will take down the assets and refund you without any input from you at all. They will literally tell you, hey, that asset wasn't okay, here's your refund, sorry about that. So this is the safety of dropping money on the asset store versus getting it from somewhere else. It solves a solution for a bit of money, and it gets you the assurance that you're okay using the solution you found versus code from the internet or assets that you found that look pretty on whatever art site. It's just, yeah.
Obviously,
with
I'm
you there.
biased, but I say yes, it's worth it. But I would say start with free stuff, because why not? When I make stuff, I like it to look pretty. I don't like gray boxing and white boxing projects. I know Jason Story, he's not here today, but he does a really great job of doing that, and he makes gray boxes look amazing. So that's a skill I don't have, nor is it a thing that I want to do. So when I'm like working, if I'm going to build a medieval town, and I didn't have my own assets for that, I literally bought something from the asset store. I think it was the manufacturer K4 pack, and that's what I used for the longest time because it looked good, it worked, and in the end, I ended up using asset store stuff in my released game because it worked. And so for that, of course, it was a good investment. So for me, it's for art, it's saving time because I'm not making it myself. It's saving money there too, and it's making me have a better experience working on my game, especially if you're focused on trying to learn, trying to get over all these hurdles that are, they're not small hurdles when you're still learning all the ins and outs. Having something fun and pretty to look at, it goes a long way. You don't need to buy 30 enemies. Let's say you've got your player character. It's the free one that you got there's a free knight character on the asset store, I think. It's a knight. It's got armor. It's free. Get that, use that. It's humanoid. Get some free humanoid stuff. You got that. Now you're like, okay, I want a bad guy to fight. If you want, throw some money down on a cool creature character. Make that your bad guy. Make that all your bad guys for a while, and just change the color of their texture to signify that it's a different type of bad guy. But that way, it's more fun. That's my preference, to make it fun. But individual financial situations obviously vary, so that's important too. You don't have to. But I like it. I think it's fun and worth it.
Agreed. Now we're almost ready to start the giveaway. I think maybe when I hit 100 people, it'll go one more minute. If you want to enter, it's up and running right now. It's been in the background. We have a ridiculous amount of assassins. Just got to warn you, they have been nerfed since last week. So don't get too excited on the assassin. If you want to change your class, now's the chance. Watch an assassin win, though. But the giveaway will kick off in just a minute. The winner will get a free 1-year license for JetBrains Writer, my favorite code editor. We've got a couple more questions that I wanted to take, but I also really briefly wanted to remind everybody, if you're interested in the GameDev conference that I'm working on, just go to, I missed an S there, https://gamedevguild.com, and it'll take you there, give you a little bit more info about it. There's some stuff up there now and a bunch more coming tomorrow and the next day. So just check that out if you're interested. Now, I want to jump over to another question that I think is somewhat related and reminded me of that, which was this one right here. How would you go about creating a library with reusable scripts in Unity? And it's related because one of the talks is about something very similar to this, about creating class libraries for use in Unity. So what are your guys' thoughts on this? Creating a library with reusable scripts in Unity. How would you do this? Is this something that you would do? Would you make a DLL that you can use in Unity? Would you make it outside of Unity? Would you make one inside of Unity that references Unity stuff? Where are you guys at with creating external libraries for reusable stuff?
Yeah, I mean, you've got different scenarios for different things. Like sometimes you might want to release a product to an enterprise and you don't want to give them all the scripts because of licensing and stuff like that. Therefore, you can build a DLL. You can have that DLL reference the Unity libraries for that Unity package you're actually using, package those DLLs in, and then ship the project with those DLLs. So that way you don't just give away all your code. And that's an enterprise thing that sometimes we do, depending on the contractual state, because you don't just want to give them everything to enable them to go and build all their own versions, but you might have to give them some of the code, but that's a contract.
You might do that in enterprise across teams a lot too.
Yeah.
In that where one team is providing, they don't provide their source, but they provide the libraries, the DLLs that you can use to interface with their systems or do the stuff that they have. And they don't give you the source because they don't want you to go in there and change it. And then they have to debug and try to figure out why yours doesn't work and theirs does.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, sometimes when you're going to, it's also smaller as a project where you just ship a load of DLLs in with the actual project itself. For just quickly to touch over some easy ways to do this reusable library system, there's a thing called Git submodules if you're using GitHub. And you can actually use Git submodules and then insert them into your project, and then you can use those Git submodules elsewhere. And those are just extra repositories that you create as a normal repository. And then when you're building your project, you could say this folder, put this Git submodule into that, and it'll insert that Git submodule. And that can have all the code in there. So then when you move to your next project, let's say you have a damageables library that treats everything that you're going to make damageable, you could create that library in a project, make that a submodule, make that Git repository, enter that as a submodule, and then the next project you bring up, you just write Git submodule, and then you bring that in to the next one. And then
that's what the talk is about, by the way, at the conference.
Oh, okay.
That's doing this with Git submodules.
Well, let me do the entire talk right now then.
You can't steal his talk. He's
ruined the whole thing. But yeah, it's a great way of doing it. And then namespacing is also quite important when you're doing these sort of libraries as well. I mean, a lot of people don't like namespaces, but I don't care about those people who use namespaces. So you could namespace a library itself. So you can say namespace, I don't know, warped imagination .damageables. That's my damageables library. And then all the code within that library, I have that namespace set up for it. So then when I'm using it externally in my project, in my custom code for my actual project, I just reference that particular namespace to use those particular items within that library. And you could ship content with this as well. You don't just have to have libraries of code. Don't think of it that way. Think of it as a sort of a package. You can put examples in there as well if you want to. Or you can do, I like to actually have script icons that go in with each of my submodule, and then all the code that's in under this submodule, I have used that script icon. Therefore, I know when I'm looking in Unity, I can see that that icon that's associated with that particular component is from that particular module. Oh, and on top of that, create menus. When you do your menu and you put it in, so when you go to use something from that submodule and that library, use the create menu option in Unity or add component menu, and then put a constant in front of that that says the sort of a name that's associated. So damageables library or warped imagination damageables /human or whatever you want to call it. Therefore, when you actually go into your component, you can look through your each library. So you can go to, warped imagination. Okay, cool. Press on that. Now I've got all my libraries. There's my damageables library, and I know my components in there.
What about you, Yorai? Do you do this? Do you go through honestly, real quick before you answer that, Dave, is this something that you do all the time regularly, or is this something that you do on rare occasion when you need to before your eye expenses?
I have libraries for all of my stuff. So
You
I
do it
have
relatively
a
regularly.
menu library. I have a damageables library. I build a lot of the same sort of games and a lot of the same sort of enterprise applications. So they tend to have the same sort of libraries required across the board. So I have all these particular things in libraries.
Okay, now your eye. I'm curious. Do you do the same thing? I know Jason Story does.
So on my end, it's a bit more nuanced. I don't make libraries left and right. I do have a collection of the scripts that I found to not be further improvable upon, but I try to see every time if I can make a better iteration of what I remember having than the last time. So I will repeat some parts of the code, making new versions instead of reusing them. This tends to be because I make very specialized research projects. For example, last week I talked about how I tried to do mesh morphing to swap out vanity directions. So that is a script that took a lot of work to figure out how to do math-wise and matrix-wise and all Unity-related functionality inside. So I put that as part of my own personal library of things about vanity of characters. And I have another one for making easy presentables using Unity's material property blocks to change fields of the mesh cleanly. And if a script tends to not be improvable upon and good, I put it in one library of my choice that I maintain. But beyond that, I really just rewrite a bunch of stuff. This actually the project I worked on to 9 a.m. I'm recently researching how to make a good buff/effect system in Unity that can do a bunch of stuff and will work with multiplayer if I needed to. And I've looked into how other Unity games do that, and I'm trying to figure out the best iteration of it. I've done like 10 different iterations yesterday alone. So
Okay, and then I guess I'll answer for myself real quick. Most of the time, I end up not reusing stuff. I had a period where I used to write libraries for everything. Then I found that I would constantly be going back and adjusting those libraries because they were never perfect. So I kind of stopped doing that. And occasionally, I will just create myself a Unity asset pack of the stuff that I need. So I'll just take the things that I actually want, export those, and I have a folder of some asset packs of some code and stuff. But overall, most of the time I end up not creating libraries. That doesn't answer the question of how to go about creating one, other than what I usually do now is just drop things into a Unity package. I almost always just go with a simple Unity package that I can drop in. One thing to note, by the way, I've seen that some transfer services change your Unity package extension to a .gz. So if you ever ran, because I noticed this when I started getting some from, I believe it was artists on Fiverr. They're sending them over, and it was changing the extension to a .gz instead of a package. So then you suddenly don't realize what it is, and it's not very clear how to open it. So if you ever run into that, just wanted to mention it since it's been an issue that I noticed this week. Somebody asked what the link was for the GameDev Guild. I just linked it again. And I think we could probably... Did you guys have any more on this, or you want to jump over to the next question we've got here?
next one, probably.
All right. So we're down to 64 battlers. I've got it running at 2x speed right now. And mostly paladins and assassins, but that's what was mostly entered. All right. So this question: is it unrecommended or bad to use Unity for non-game applications, such as a carpool or a calculator app? I assume the answer is yes, it's terrible. You should never do this. Never. Only make video games, right? Only mobile games. No, yeah, no, it's a very valid question. It's something that I think a lot of people don't understand because Unity is a game engine first. But no, it is definitely not bad or unrecommended. Probably 20% or more of the development in Unity is on non-game stuff. I don't know the actual percentage. Last number I saw was 20. That was a long time ago. There's a lot of stuff being built for just enterprise or interactive user development stuff in Unity for applications all the time, whether it's a desktop thing or a kiosk thing, a mobile thing, or applications like literally running in a car on your car dash. So definitely not, but I don't want to be the only one to talk about this because I know Dave does a ridiculous amount of non-game stuff. Where do you guys? Who wants to chime in here?
Oh, shall I go? I could talk a lot for this, but
Okay. So let me go have a quick take first.
I'll jump in.
Give you a second.
So one thing I want to bring up is that Unity specifically had its logo redesign just to advertise, hey, we're not only a game engine, it's Unity for everything. And they approach industrial stuff, and they approach movies and other types of available media. So one thing to watch out for is that Unity will take resources if you let it, but it doesn't necessarily break the bank on memory, rendering, and all those costs. So you can make a calculator with it. It's just going to be a really fancy calculator if you do. For carpools or simple things, you probably can. And it's not going to be a big problem. It's going to be very convenient if you know how to use Unity already, but that's something you can say with any piece of software. It's just pick the tool set you're comfortable with if it works. Doesn't really matter as long as it delivers the requirements you've been given. With that, David, please take it away.
Yeah, okay. No, it's not unrecommended, and no, it's not bad for using Unity for non-game applications.
Done.
Yeah. So to give you some
just give some examples of
I feel
where
like I'm name dropping every time I do this, but I'll do it anyway.
And there's a follow-up question too, just to kind of tie in that Adam asked about how it is for mobile apps, because I heard that using it drains the battery a lot, which I think used to be the case before things kind of
used to be the case, doesn't anymore. Yeah. There you go.
It got split out and separated, right?
So for unrecommended, okay. So I've used Unity for a variety of things, from games that have done very well to much smaller games and through to enterprise. Now, I use Unity for multiple projects at the moment. One is for...
Can we pause for a second?
Yeah.
Because that was the best thing you've ever said. Games that were big to the games that were really popular to smaller games.
Yeah. the gamut of games.
I just love that way of wording it. That's the way I'm going to word it next time.
Yeah, exactly. Boast first, go humble later. So for some examples, I use Unity for virtual reality training in enterprise. So for people that work in the manufacturing industry or anything like that, I build applications that enable them to put on a VR headset and train with the equipment before they actually go and use the equipment in real life. That involves non-hardware, non-custom hardware, and also hardware solutions. And that uses Unity as a game engine in the back end for that. And when I say hardware, there are things like you might be doing a fire extinguisher training, and we build things like fire extinguishers that you can actually hold and see in virtual reality and then use. In the background,
like a physical fire extinguisher that you've hooked up the VR stuff, the sensors and stuff,
and all the rest. In the back here, you see a motion simulator with mech arms that works in Unity as well. So we have Unity, you put on a VR headset, you jump into the mech, you move around with giant arms. It's got a full motion simulator, and we run all that through Unity and some Arduino stuff. That's mostly games though, but we do some enterprise stuff with that sort of thing. Going back to enterprise, I built a team that developed stuff for the Super Bowl and for the drafts for Lollapalooza, for Austin City Limits, all the big music events and all the big sports teams that used a real-time game engine to integrate social media interactions into a scene that was shown on the big displays during the game. Or at the musical festival. For instance, we'd done a 4-sided 3-story tower at Lollapalooza that you could actually walk up to and interact with because it had augmented reality and a big giant funhouse mirror with like Snapchat filters and all the rest of it. If you look at the new Kiss Cam, a lot of that is actually using augmented reality and real-time game engines to overlay 3D stuff on top of people. Going through other things, I've done some UX stuff to do with robotics for person presence and virtual reality real estate and all sorts of things, basically. So yeah, there's a lot you can do with Unity. It doesn't have to just be games, and there's money out there to be made doing that as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of money in the non-game industry for people who are into it. All right, we've got our final 8 fighters here for the giveaway. I'll let that run through, and I wanted to also link David's new video on Wordle. So if you want to go learn how to make Wordle, I just dropped it in chat. I'll drop it in the description as well, so you guys can all go check it out. It looks like it's only got 10 views. I think it needs like 160 more and a bunch of likes. I was just looking at the number of people watching this live, so that's where the number came from. All right, we got our final fighters. We've got a wizard, a warrior. Ooh, what's left? Oh, 2 wizards. Okay, see, assassins got nerfed, so no assassins.
I picked an assassin.
So we got 2 wizards, a bard, and a paladin. None of those actually got changed. Assassins got nerfed, and berserkers got a small buff, but who's gonna win it? Wizard versus wizard. We got the wizard with more health won. So the worm beat the demon. And then who's gonna win over here? The bard versus the paladin. Paladin destroyed it. That wasn't even close. Oh, it hasn't ended yet, but
no, wait for it.
Watch it be like some weird.
Bard is tenacious.
That would be hilarious if it makes a comeback now, because it. Okay, no. Got 1 paladin versus 1 wizard in the finals. So it's Turkey Jerky versus Dylan Norquist.
Where do you come up with these names?
It's their YouTube name, right? That's the best part.
I know it's there. I'm saying, where do they come up with these names?
So we've got Turkey Jerky versus Norquest. It looks like the paladin might win it. Maybe the wizard's going to come around. Well, no, and again, this is for a 1-year JetBrains Writer license. If you're interested in JetBrains Writer, or if you're doing code development, you should be interested in it and try it out. So congratulations, Dylan. Shoot me an email, jason@game.courses. I will send you over that license. And again, everybody, thanks again for coming out. Hello. And thanks for watching and joining us live. Really appreciate y'all being here. Please hit the thumbs up button. Go share the stream. Drop a comment down below. Let us know what you like, what we could do better, what would make the show even more interesting. And check out all of the links and stuff down below. Anybody have any final words or anything you wanted to say before we wave goodbye?
I just want to say that a lot of games seems to be coming out this month, so keep an eye out because there's probably a lot of fun to be had. Yeah.
Definitely. Andrew?
No,
You're frozen.
Nothing to say except for thanks and bye and have a great week. All
right. And David, I'll give you the last word.
Go and buy all of Andrew's assets.
Oh, yeah. I should have said that.
Fair enough. Yep. And use the link down below to do that. All right. I'll see you all next week. Come back, like, subscribe, share, all that stuff. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.